heritage, beliefs, and continuing relationship with the land, and that they are the proud survivors of more than 200 years of dispossession. Council reiterates its commitment to address disadvantages and attain justice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of this community. The prayer. Almighty God, we humbly ask you to bless this meeting, direct and prosper our deliberations, for the advancement of your glory and the true welfare of the people of Newcastle. Ladies and gentlemen, will you honour the memory of those who've served and died that we might meet here in peace? Thank you, councillors. Do we have any declarations of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest? Councillor Duncan? No? I'll just check the chat. There being no declarations, I'll just get the confirmation of the previous minutes from Public Voice dated the 19th of May 2020 and the Ordinary Council meeting dated the 26th of May. It's just, if we could just keep our microphones on mute, it just is easier on whoever is speaking. Hope you're all right, Councillor Rufo. And the confirmation of the Ordinary Council meeting dated the 26th of May. Do I have a mover of those? Councillor Mackenzie, and a seconder, Councillor Byrne. Thank you. Is there any discussion? There being none, all those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare those carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, you would have received two Lord Mayoral minutes. The first Lord Mayoral minute, I wanted to make sure that you were all aware of the work that's been happening both internally and externally at council regarding how we're dealing with COVID-19 as a city, as well as how we are working with our city partners on the city task force and the work that those working parties have also been doing, particularly with affected industries in the city, which has been quite extensive. Hence, the length of the motion and the detail that sits behind it is detail that I know that most councillors would have already read through, given it summarises the last couple of months of work, but I wanted to make sure it was all collated into one place for ease of reference if anyone wanted to have a discussion about it. So Part A just notes the most recent update from New South Wales Health, who is also a member of the City Task Force. Part B notes the most relevant data around jobs and employment that is obviously of great concern to most of us here in the city. The ABS data has seen almost 10,000 jobs lost in Newcastle since March 2020, with an unemployment rate of 7.7%. Very concerningly, the youth unemployment rate is 18.7%. It also notes with concern that these figures do not include those who are receiving JobKeeper payment and those who are not actively seeking employment, which actually may mask the true extent of the unemployment situation across Newcastle. Part C is an update on the Community and Economic Resilience Package that we adopted in May as a council. And that $5.5 million package has started to be delivered immediately in March, and to members of the community who are most vulnerable, and also to businesses that have been affected by the COVID-19 global pandemic. It just notes the work that we have been doing, and I know that you're already aware of that. That's the interest-free rate deferrals, the 50% discount on rent for anyone in the City of Newcastle owned building. It's the relaxation of a range of fees and policies. It's the promoting of local procurement, and also the quick payment to any of our outstanding debtors and the quick turnaround. And I know that we've been briefed by our CFO on that. Providing substantial grant funding to support community sector partners that are doing the direct support in our community, and also the current targeted grants for industries most affected by COVID-19. Part D actually outlines the Newcastle response, and that's predominantly by not only the task force, but a number of working groups that sit under the task force. The Newcastle response, although we released it several weeks ago, I've attached it just to update you, and I know that you would have already seen it. And that has been sent to our state and federal representatives with a unanimous policy position of the City of Newcastle, together with all of those industry partners and workshop partners on the task force. I think it's really important to note that unanimous position and the work the task force is doing on behalf of our community. And it's advocating for a permanent and sustainable increase in the support for unemployed and vulnerable to prevent social security payments falling back to an inadequate rate. The task force believes that the current and ongoing social security payments should be independently reviewed and monitored to ensure that all Australians are adequately supported through unemployment and disadvantage. Furthermore, we ask the state and federal governments through the National Cabinet consider the development of policy measures to support the financial sustainability of the community sector, including dedicated engagement with First Nations people and the disability sector. It also goes on to note the Newcastle response of the City Task Force unanimously endorsing our City of Newcastle's infrastructure list, which I know that we have previously discussed together at an earlier meeting, ordinary council meeting, and I've just added as an attachment B if you needed a quick reference to it this evening. And that also includes the advocacy we have done to New South Wales, the New South Wales and federal governments, and that involves all of the catalyst precincts in the Metropolitan Plan and the large-scale infrastructure priority projects like dealing with coastal erosion at Stockton Beach, flood mitigation at Wallsend, the expansion of Newcastle Airport, supporting the diversification of the Port of Newcastle, the Hunter Sports and Entertainment Precinct, the light rail expansion, the Lower Hunter Freight Corridor, affordable housing initiatives, which I note is also on the agenda this evening, the Metropolitan-wide active transport, walking and cycling improvements, the John Hunter Hospital upgrade, the art gallery expansion, local sporting amenity upgrades, playground upgrades, particularly for disability inclusion, the ferry terminal at Wickham and the increase of the pensioner rebate. It also goes on to list the local priority infrastructure list, and that is the organics processing facility, the Richmond Vale Rail Trail, the Newcastle Beach Community Facility upgrade at South Newcastle, the bi-directional cycleway, West End Stage 2 Phase 1, the Newcastle East End Streetscape upgrades and cycleway, the Foreshore Park All Abilities Playground, the Wallsend Active Hub and the Local Centres Program. That unanimous support from all of the members of the task force was very welcome, including the advocacy for funding to other levels of government. But I also note that many of those initiatives actually are included in our budget this evening, which is a good outcome for the city. Part D is the leadership team and action team. I thought it was worth just updating. I know the details are probably known to you all, but I thought it was worth updating you on the work that's actually happening, not only with the substantive task force and the 17 leaders and organisations, particularly large employers and advocacy groups that have made up the task force, but there's also a number of significant members and work happening in the action team. And that support, I think it was important to also recognise and note, and that was obviously from New South Wales Health, as well as what we call Local Land Council, West Group, HunterNet, the New South Wales Government, Regional New South Wales, and I'll just go over the page. The Arts Alliance, a number of our major centres of finance, as well as the University of Newcastle. It's really important that we've also had Mr. Warwick Jordan, who's the Hunter Region Employment Facilitator on behalf of the federal government, who works in this area, as well as our multicultural community CEO, our Hunter Young Professionals, as well as our Youth Council Youth Mayor, as well as the executive officer of our Community Disability Hunter Alliance as well has been involved. So you can see the breadth and the amount of work that our team here, Ashley Abbott's team, Brett Smith's team, are doing at the City of Newcastle, and the amount of engagement they have, not only with the members of the task force, but also a number of working parties and action teams that are helping to implement the overarching policy that we actually adopted back in March, in terms of knowing that we had an emerging health crisis in March, but also predicting that that was going to have a significant economic impact on our local community. And it also notes that the advocacy is also involved unanimous support and advocacy to the New South Wales Government to assist international students in New South Wales. And that after that advocacy, there was an announcement from the New South Wales Government. And that's very much around the joined up and unanimous work that has been supported by City of Newcastle staff, but also our 17 partners and a number of their key staff members, all working in collaboration in the city. I wanted to also make sure, I know that you have received the memos and the updates, but I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to comment on, if you wanted to, that we had the Affected Industries Roundtable earlier this month. And we had good representation from the AHA, the SDA, as well as Live Music Task Force, Tourism, Newcastle Tourism Industry Group, as well as Screen Hunter, the Independent Creative Arts Alliance, the Hunter Writers Centre, our Newcastle BIA, and the Makers and Traders in the city centre. And that has been very encouraging work that our team has been doing, specifically targeted at industries like tourism and hospitality, as well as retail, that have been significantly impacted, obviously, by the lockdowns and the restrictions to the movement of people. I also just had an opportunity to update you on the presentation the Deputy Lord Mayor made together with our Economic Development Coordinator, Simon Massey, to the Newcastle Business Club. And I've attached that slide presentation that was made at lunchtime today. So I thought you would all, if you didn't have a chance to attend online, you would appreciate that being updated as well. And I know that you're aware of all the details, but I thought that was opportune. And then obviously the background is something that you're all aware of, because I've updated you several times on that. I'll commend the motion to you, but I also just wanted to take the opportunity in particular to thank Brett Smith, Ashley Abbott, Simon Massey and Nathaniel Babington, who have been leading all this work and this collaboration with many, many sectors, particularly affected industries here in the City of Newcastle, and that your work is very appreciated. And the collaboration, I think, is a really important cornerstone of how we will deal with this economic and unemployment crisis in specific industries, not just in Newcastle, but also in the Hunter region. I'll open it up to discussion for councillors and commend the motion to you. I'll just check the chat to see if any councillors have asked to speak. If there are no speakers, Councillor Luke, did you want to speak?
Yes, Lord Mayor, sorry, I just took a second to find the mouse. Just a couple of things here I will point out. One, and the media constantly jump on this. I note that the mention of unemployment figures don't include certain groups, because they include very specific groups. But it often gets missed. The reason is the survey being quoted at that point is usually the unemployment figures, which are very specific by definition. Quite simply, the ABS actually produces underemployment figures through the Australian Workforce Survey. So those unemployment figures are also published as well. They just don't get the same publicity as the unemployment figures, and then people complain that the unemployment figures don't include underemployment. It's not a particular point with this motion per se, but just want to point out those figures are always there, and you can actually look them up at any time and see those. The other one that I do have a small concern with here is,
if I could just address that first, we're working with Dr. Anthea Bill from Hunter Research Foundation, and the reason why that is included, it was on her advice. It's around the timing of the Australian Workforce Survey, and that those figures aren't available at the moment, so they really are guessing what there is. They know there is more underemployment, but until those figures come out, they can't actually for certain say what they are.
Oh, no, I agree with you. The only reason I make that point is it's something that's always jumped on, but it's never mentioned that those figures are done. They're just got a different cycle. And obviously all of these have a different cycle because they can't do them all at one time. Anyway, the other one that I have a small concern with is the New South Wales health update. If number 2 just pointed out that we note that Hunter New England, noting that Hunter Health is calling for Hunter New England residents urged to reconsider visiting Melbourne. Personally, I don't particularly want to urge people not to go out and travel. I think the borders should be opened. Personally, I think the what's being made of a small increase in numbers in Melbourne is not something that people should be panicking about at this point in time. I understand New South Wales Health has come out with this, but if it could just be adjusted slightly to note that Hunter Health is calling for this, not particularly have the council calling for it. I'll leave that up to you whether you're willing to adjust that, Lord Mayor.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. I think what's important about my intention is, apart from memos and emails and very regular updates, I know from several staff members and myself, what I'll endeavour to do, maybe not every single month, it depends on what happens in that month, but at least every second month, update councillors in real time what has actually occurred or transpired, particularly because it's such a rapid moving, a rapid fast-paced environment. And that's why I collated such a detailed motion, just to make sure I know that you've received bits and pieces of different information, but also because it is timely and brought to you today, I like to include the most recent health updates, given that we do have a pandemic plan in New South Wales, and New South Wales Health is the lead agency providing health advice. So I'm very happy to note that. But next time I bring you an update, it will probably be the month after next, after our next task force meeting. And what I will do is probably just also provide updated health advice, just because it's timely.
Yeah. The other point I'll just make is, because with that, I'm actually probably happy to adjust that to support the motion, but I will note there's certain things in there I don't agree with, but they're things that are actually the city task force has actually decided to make a decision on. We're just noting what their stand is or view is on something, and that's fair enough. They make up their own mind, and it's right for us to note that. I will just mention, going on the unemployment, I actually think you're right. The unemployment figure will end up being much higher. Quite simply, we're still all the washout of all of this. We don't know yet. We have no idea what it'll end up being, but I think most people would assume it's going to be higher than what it currently is.
Absolutely agree with you. And that's why I want to try and provide regular updates. I probably can't overstate the work that's actually occurring between the City Task Force partners, which you can see there are 17 advocacy groups for small business and large business included, as well as arts and the cultural sector, as well as large employers in Newcastle. But there is also many, many other strands to people and organisations that are involved in this collaborative approach. And the work that our staff are doing to coordinate this, as well as tap into work that's actually happening in other organisations around the city, to have a very shared and collaborative approach, is one way we can hopefully stay as much ahead of the curve as we can, particularly when we know there is going to be the effects in retail to some extent, but particularly in tourism and hospitality are very large and very deep. And the particular concern that I have, given those regular updates and those figures from Dr. Bill, is really in this region around youth unemployment, and coupled with people in that age group obviously trying to find their first jobs, potentially trying to study for the first time with changes to university that's happening. It is a very different environment for young people in our city, in our region, than 12 months ago. And I think that there does need to be a lot of thought and support structures put around not only the industries that are affected, but also what it means for our young people, either living here or coming to the city. Is there any other discussion, councillors? If there's no other discussion, I'll commend the motion to you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare that motion carried. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, I'll move on to the next Lord Mayoral Minute, and that is an offer that we've had to join the G20 Smart Cities Alliance as a pilot city. It's pretty self-explanatory. We've been put forward by the Australia-New Zealand Smart City Council, recommended the City of Newcastle as a leading Australian city to become a G20 Smart City Alliance pilot city. This motion also notes that the G20 Smart City Alliance aims to develop global best practice frameworks for ethical smart cities. It also notes that the G20 Smart Cities Alliance is underpinned by the World Economic Forum and includes government and industries partners acting in global collaboration. It welcomes the endorsement of the Australia-New Zealand Smart Cities Council as an acknowledgement of the leadership provided by not only the elected council, but also the staff we have that work in our Smart Cities team. It also asks us to sign a letter of intent with the World Economic Forum to establish a mutually beneficial cooperation with the G20 Smart Cities Alliance as a pilot city. Councillors, I thought this was a very good opportunity that came across my desk in the last week, and I wanted to bring this to you as quickly as possible, given the work that we have done in our smart cities, noting that we have won several statewide and also national awards for our strategy, but also the implementation of our strategy. It's my understanding that the G20 group are looking for 2 cities in each G20 country, one a capital and one a regional city or not a metropolitan area, to join as a pilot city. And I thought this was a wonderful opportunity to actually not only share knowledge, but also make sure that our framework and our ethical practices around the use of technology and new technology in cities was actually at the forefront of the smart cities around the world. And I know that we have had a very forward-thinking and avant-garde approach to smart cities, and I think this is a natural next step. And I note that our very successful adoption of our smart city strategy, 2017 to 2021, which I've attached, and I know that you're all very aware of that, we'll probably need to review that in the coming 12 months as well, and going forward, and seeing where we can actually go, particularly because we've had a good amount of success as a test bed and a place where new technologies can be trialled and tested here through the Smart City project. And that has actually been recognised, as I mentioned, nationally and internationally for that work. And again, it's a similar team at Council to the previous Lord Mayoral Minute, but I have to acknowledge the work of that team, not only in the development of the policy, but also in the implementation over the last 4 years. It's been very successful for the City of Newcastle. I'll commend the motion to you. Is there any discussion, councillors? Councillor Clausen?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, happy to speak in favour of this motion and the opportunity to participate as potentially one of the pilot cities with this G20 program. Particularly pleased by the background and the opportunity that it provides us to showcase some of the work that we've been doing. And I just wanted to make a brief mention, given it is an opportunity for us to talk about smart cities, of the fact that the smart city investment we've been making in recent years has really set us up well to respond to the COVID crisis, amongst other things. It's certainly been evident in the rollout of some of our community economic resilience plan, just how relevant the smart city thinking and how advanced we were because of some of the programs that we'd already developed. And then some other things, like the fact that last week we've had some smart parking sensors installed along the coastline at the beaches that take advantage of the LoRaWAN network that we had rolled out. These are real tangible projects that are improving the lives of Newcastle residents. And so the fact that that might be recognised on this international stage is helpful, and particularly appreciative of the fact that this report notes, the G20 environment notes, that people might be travelling to Newcastle to see us as a pilot city, and that much of the work will be undertaken via presumably Zoom-style links and opportunities to connect with others that are similarly advanced in their thinking.
Thank you, Councillor Clausen. Is there any further discussion, councillors? Councillor Duncan.
Lord Mayor, thank you. I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts to that. I think it's a wonderful recognition of the work that this city has been doing in the smart cities area, to be invited to be one of the 2 cities to be part of this pilot project. I think that's fantastic. I think if we look as well, and Councillor Clausen touched on this, with what we've seen from COVID-19, and suddenly the vast majority of businesses in this country have had to see themselves operating online, have their staff safely and securely working from home. And I think for us to be continuing to invest in the work in this area, our education and opportunities to learn in this area are absolutely critical as we head into whatever the new normal will be after this pandemic. But I also wanted to point out that some of our strengths, of course, around education and research, medical research, particularly in this area, near the CSIRO, HMRI and our university. And I note that with the significant investment at the John Hunter Hospital precinct of $750 million from the state government, and potentially $1.5 billion in a health innovation precinct, along with continuing work, that one of the items in our budget tonight for a digital city corridor, will be absolutely key in ensuring that people can work here, work smart here, innovate here, and make significant contributions to local and state and national economies. So I think an opportunity to share that sort of learning is really powerful for us.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any further discussion, councillors? Councillor Church.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm really pleased to see that privacy and transparency is noted as one of their aims. As a council and as a community, we're going to start collecting a lot of data about people, about where they are, their movements, and the handling of that data needs to have paradigms and principles and policies around it, so that we do maintain some semblance of privacy in our community. We note that there's all sorts of facial recognition software and tracking software and information that is the natural extension of a smart city. I'm pleased that our team is very aware of this and that's a live issue for them, but I just raise it as an ongoing concern that we need to be vigilant, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Absolutely agree, and it is a good opportunity to share that knowledge and understanding with other cities that have similar technologies, and make sure that there is an open and transparent method in their collection, storage and usage. And that's always been one of the bigger challenges. And I commend the councillors and the staff that have put together our strategy that has ensured that that data is kept in public hands, as opposed to other cities who've gone down different paths around how they roll out infrastructure for smart cities in terms of enabling platforms. And we have chosen to actually have control of those enabling platforms, which I think is of huge benefit. And I know that many different cities have actually come and visited the work that our team have done with that strategy and the implementation of that technology to actually see how that has been done, not only in practice, but also the upside and the benefits to actually keeping that enabling technology in public hands. Councillor Luke, did you have your hand up? Oh, Councillor, I just need you to unmute.
Sorry about that, Lord Mayor. I thought I had. Just a couple of things on point. My understanding, so although this is called the G20 Smart Cities Alliance, my understanding is it's not linked to the G20 in any way. You don't have to be a member of the G20 or from a G20 country to be in it. And it's actually run by the World Economic Forum, which was set up by Klaus Schwab. And so that's my understanding, is it's actually not linked to the G20 in any way. With this being a group that's actually set up originally by the World Economic Forum, I am not that certain that I would be supporting it. Yeah, a quick for those who don't know, if you have a bit of a look at the World Economic Forum and in particular its Davos Manifesto, which is really built around an overturn of capitalism and a few other issues. So I have some concerns here. When I first read this earlier, I thought it was actually to do with the G20, which is a completely separate organisation. It's not linked to the World Economic Forum or Davos at all. Yeah, and in fact, this is actually getting even very much closer, and it links nowadays to China as well in the way it operates. So yeah, I won't be supporting the motion as it is.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other discussion, councillors? If there's no other discussion, it would probably be an opportune time also to update you. I was contacted by News 24 ABC today. Regional New South Wales had released a report based on historical census data, given that the 2016 is the only data that we have, that showed a significant influx of millennials moving to regional cities, and of particular note was the city of Newcastle and also the Gold Coast as an increase in that population. And projects like a Smart City project, as Councillor Duncan has mentioned, those really important institutions like the University of Newcastle, CSIRO and NEAR, as well as the work we're doing to try and attract and retain talent in that age bracket is also one of our key strategies. And to see that, I know it's historical data, but I would imagine the next time we do get that data analysed, we could see an even larger amount of that younger age group, that very productive age group, actually staying in the city of Newcastle and in regional areas. And that is because cities like Newcastle have gone down this path of connectivity and making sure we're globally connected and have the platforms that allow people to live in an area that is obviously, like we all do, love the city of Newcastle for its natural beauty and its natural features, its lack of capital city transport congestion, but also the good job opportunities, the access to high quality higher education, and also professional employment. And we've seen that income and economic mix and employment mix significantly change over the last 20 years. And to me, smart cities, I know it's been a buzzword for a number of years, but it's really about setting us up for the future and making sure that we do see that trend in that, and that talent attraction of people in that particularly millennial age group wanting to stay and live and work in their very productive years here in the city of Newcastle. And normally they matriculate to capital cities, and it's great to actually see that step change. And it is work that happens like Smart City work, making sure that connectivity is available to those global networks, and those jobs are actually available, and that innovation network for jobs that we don't even know that exist into the future actually have that platform and that ability to actually collaborate. There's names that come to mind aside from resilient cities are sticky cities, where they're knowledge attractors, and people will come to the city of Newcastle because of the University of Newcastle, because of those STEM networks and those IT networks that are developed through having programs in the smart city. So I think it's actually a really wonderful opportunity to pilot, particularly the governance issues that Councillor Church has raised, that people are very aware of when we're talking about collection of large data sets and personal information and the ethical treatment of those, but you're framing it in a context of livability and sustainability, and making sure that we are, as a competitive place to live, if people are making that choice to set up their business or move here as a young couple and start a family, you know, with Geelong or the Gold Coast, or even one day compete with a capital city for that talent pool, because that's what we're competing with, and it's a global talent pool. So I think this is a really good opportunity for the city, and it's a real acknowledgement of the work of the staff in our smart city team that we've been invited to become a pilot city. So I commend the motion to you, councillors, and I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare that motion carried. Thank you, councillors. That concludes the minutes. I'll go to the reports by council officers, and you can just let me know if you would like discussion. I don't probably need to ask for Stockton. I'm going to assume discussion. Write-off of sundry debt. Is there any discussion? Do I have a move of that motion? Councillor Byrne, do I have a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare that motion carried. Item 32, making of a rate and charge for 2020-21. Any discussion? No discussion? Discussion? Yes?
Discuss, please, Lord Mayor.
The making of the rate, hunter catchment contributions and commission for the year commencing the 1st of July 2020. Discussion? There's no discussion. Do I have a mover? Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Clausen. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare that carried unanimously. Item 34, interest on overdue rates and charges. Is there any discussion? No discussion. Do I have a mover? Councillor Mackenzie, do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne, all those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? There are no votes against. I declare that carried unanimously. Exhibition of draft local housing strategy.
Discuss, Lord Mayor.
Discuss. The budget, I'll assume discussion. The proposed road closure at 81 Fletcher Street, Adamstown. If there's no discussion, do I have a mover for the motion? Councillor Winnie Bart, seconded Councillor Duncan. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare that carried unanimously. Item 38, reclassification of council land, 280 Hunter Street, Newcastle.
Discuss, Lord Mayor.
Discuss. The tender for natural areas rehabilitation services, contract number 2020/322T. Is there discussion? If there's no discussion, do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Byrne, do I have a seconder? Councillor Duncan. All those in favour, please raise their hand. All those against? As there are no votes against, I declare that motion carried unanimously. The Executive Monthly Performance Report, item 40. Any discussion? If there's no discussion, do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Clausen, do I have a seconder? Councillor Duncan. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against?
Sorry, Lord Mayor, could we do that by division?
Okay, sure. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Councillor Nelms, Councillor Rufo, Councillor Winnie Barts, Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Clausen, Councillor Dunn, Councillor Luke, Councillor Byrne, Councillor White, Councillor Robinson. All those against, please raise their hand. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Church. I declare the motion carried. Then we go on to notices of motion. So I'll go back to the start of the agenda, and we have the endorsement of the draft Stockton Coastal Management Program. Councillors, I will commend this to you, and I'm happy to move this item from the chair. I just note the memo we received today with a number of changes, and I want to make sure those changes were included in the final document. I know that also Councillor Mackenzie has some additions to the motion, but I'll allow him to speak to that, and I will ask for a seconder. Councillor White, great. Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, as you're aware, and I know that it has been a very long process over many, many decades in looking at how we deal with coastal erosion at Stockton. And this plan that has been very well publicly consulted and worked on tirelessly by not only a wonderful team at Council, led by Ken Liddell and Joe Rigby, and particular mention of the work of Corinne Jerd in this process. It has been not only very difficult at times because of the time restrictions, but it has also been an issue that has pervaded our city and the coastline for many, many decades. And there has always been, differing opinions on how coastal erosion could or should be solved in Stockton. And at this point in time, I'm very pleased that the draft plan had the overwhelming support of not only the local community in Stockton, but the broader community in Newcastle when it went out to public consultation. And I believe it is the work that we have done, not only with the Community Liaison Group, who have had over 22 meetings over the last 2 years, most of which I have always attended to try and help the community work through their issues. And I know a couple of councillors have also attended over time, and I thank them for their contribution and working with the community in that manner. The community were very clear that mass sand nourishment was always their priority. And what the CMP does deliver for the community at Stockton is actually the aspiration of mass sand nourishment, but it also has put into train through very, very important work and diplomatic work with the Deputy Premier's office to actually see movement and collaboration at state government level, which I think is fantastic, and the New South Wales government should be commended for their interest through the Deputy Premier, particularly over the last 6 months in working on a resolution. The CMP acknowledges, particularly through the scoping studies, that the loss of sand is much greater than had it ever been measured before. It also acknowledges that mass sand nourishment is the only way to stop the building and the construction of hard structures that have caused so much community concern and exacerbated erosion in some instances because it hasn't been coupled with mass sand nourishment in the past. This plan is very heavily reliant on a collaboration between all levels of government. But of particular interest is the work that the Deputy Premier's task force is doing. And the work that they are doing is going to be integral in finding a sand source of a non-terrestrial, of an offshore sand source to actually provide that ability to mass nourish Stockton Beach, as has been done in places like the Gold Coast, noting that this has never been done in New South Wales and that legislative change is going to be necessary to make this happen. And the impediments have been the cost, the time, the lack of agreement, the fact that you need 3 levels involved, the fact that you need legislative change to get sand offshore and back onto Stockton Beach. But the work that's been done is quite holistic in the fact that it also looks at opportunistic terrestrial sources in the meantime, while that process that the task force is going to go through with looking for those sand sources, testing their viability, and also progressing the DA and the EIS, which I think is a really important component of this work. But we do need to have an adopted CMP. And the Minister has asked us to expedite that. And that has been a huge amount of stress and pressure. And then coupled with COVID-19, a very difficult time to do broad community engagement. And I think it's testament to the team and Caitlin and her work to make sure as many people as possible were directly contacted in Stockton to have an opportunity to provide us with feedback on this plan. And as such, changes were made and have been made to the plan to actually incorporate that community feedback and actually have a very robust document for the first time in our history that actually also has the collaboration of the New South Wales government. And I also acknowledge the work of DPI and the other state government agencies and their support of council through this process, because without their support, we wouldn't have the option of being able to adopt a CMP prior to the ministerial direction, which is the 30th of June. And I know that that commitment from the DP will hopefully flow through to other ministers, and we will see movement around not only the investigation of sand sources, but also the certification of the CMP in hopefully record time. And that puts us in a very good position as a council, being one of the first councils to have an adopted CMP in New South Wales, given that a lot of councils are working towards the end of 2021 for their adoption guidelines. So I commend this document to you, and in doing so, it is with great gratitude to the team at the City of Newcastle who have worked tirelessly for many, many months and years on this CMP. Are there any speakers? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Very happy to support this, and given the feedback from the community, I'd be hoping that we might see a unanimous endorsement from the elected council. I just wanted to reiterate your points about just how significant the work has been achieved on this. It's effectively 2 years of work completed in 3 months during a global epidemic. You know, it's this sort of thing. It's a Herculean response from our staff. I want to also echo your thanks to their staff. I also want to mention our former senior environmental strategist, Mark Manning, who carried this project for many years. And unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he shouldn't be forgotten in terms of the contribution that he's made to the plan overall. We had a different strategy we had a different anticipated outcome for our community engagement, obviously, which was frustrated by social and physical distancing requirements and so forth connected to the epidemic. But that being said, I think we did as much as could have been possible, and I think that's a testament again to the number of submissions and the way that those submissions have been handled in the modifications to the plan. But I know that there are people in Stockton, and some of whom have contacted me in the last week, who have been concerned about community engagement. There's still a lack of complete understanding of what the plan entails and what the impacts will be and what the consequences are. And I recognise that, and I just want to emphasise a couple of components of the plan. One is that this is the first stage of the program. It's also an iterative program. So as we go through the implementation of the CMP, you will see changes which will be a consequence of the technical and the technical implementation, but also the community response over time. And the second point that I wanted to emphasise is the limitation of this plan in terms of its geographical scope. So a lot of concerns were raised about the lack of consideration of some of the engineering structures that have previously been mooted as part of what the coastal erosion measures in Stockton were going to look like. Recognising that a lot of those, if not all of those, are outside the geographical scope. So things like artificial headlands, which have been prominent in previous solutions, would be further north of where this particular component of the CMP ends in a geographical sense. So those haven't dropped off, they haven't been lost, they are subject to the further iteration, they're subject to the whole coastal management program, which will be implemented which will be looking for endorsement, I guess, in December of next year. The key concern, though, that I thought it was important to raise, and it was the one that was raised by a number of submitters, including the community liaison group, was the lack of certainty and what they described as the practical details of implementation. And I think that's recognised by all of us. This plan relies on fairly significant collaboration, as you mentioned, Lord Mayor, with the state government, with the task force, with the federal government, with numerous state departments and partners. And in that way, I wanted to include an amendment, a Part B amendment, which I circulated, councillors, earlier today, and I'll put in the chat, give you an opportunity to read it. But the purpose of this is to acknowledge those concerns raised by Community Liaison Group and others, and to formally record much of what you've also added, Lord Mayor, is that we are working towards that collaboration with the New South Wales Government, including the Minister for Local Government and the Deputy Task Force, to achieve those legislative changes and those funding agreements that are necessary to see this plan put into action, and to make sure that we're communicating our understanding that without those changes, our ability to deliver the coastal management program that we are putting forward will be severely circumscribed. So it's about this amendment is intended to draw attention and to recognise the agreement of the council that we are committing to that ongoing collaboration with those agencies to see this plan through to its fruition, and to see the promise of addressing coastal erosion at Stockton actually delivered during this or the next term of council. But this program is technically feasible, it's financially achievable, it enjoys community support, it's a Herculean effort. I'm proud to be associated with the council that is putting it forward. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. I'm very happy to take your suggestions and put them as a Part B to the substantive motion. I think it's a good addition and covers off everything that basically you and I have said, and it's well placed, and the liaison group are very well versed in the details of the CMP and what the next steps are, but it is very reliant, like many complex wicked city problems, they rely on complex forms of collaboration and different levels of government contributing to get a solution. And the changes that came through in the memo to a number of the action items also reference the Deputy Premier's task force as an update just from that meeting last week. But it is understandable that not everyone can be a coastal engineering expert. I don't, like, if we were in chambers, this is just the documents here of the studies, and they're technical engineering studies. So it is, part of our job is communicating and deciphering all of that technical detail down to something that's palatable and understandable for people in their busy lives who aren't coastal engineering experts. And I think what's really important to recognise is the community have almost moved on from knowing that council is working with them on a solution and gone to the next stage, which is making sure that not only the New South Wales government, and that intent has already been very clear from the Deputy Premier, but also the federal government is also going to work together, because we will need possibly a very unified and also detailed response from all three levels of government, depending on where sand is found offshore. It could be in federal waters, and it could actually require significant involvement of the federal government. I'm hoping that at this stage we do find a viable sand source that is in New South Wales government waters, because that would probably be easier and will expedite the process. But if that is the case, that is the case. The main objective here is to have mass re-nourishment of Stockton Beach. So I'll just check with the seconder. Councillor White, are you happy to accept Councillor Mackenzie's Part B as part of the motion?
Yes, Lord Mayor.
Did you want to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. I would just, I think, thank you for that visual of that document for those of us that aren't scientists, engineers and coastal experts, of just kind of how mind-boggling the work that has actually been completed actually is. And that was a very good representation, I think, for what we've had to try and get our head around, and for what the community have had to try and work through. And as Councillor Mackenzie said, the fact that it does have overwhelming support from the community, I think, does just really show the amount of work that our staff have done. Not just in getting the plan together, but particularly through this time in being able to talk about it and be able to get the feedback so that the community were able to support it. I think that, as you've said, the tireless work of staff has been astronomical. And I think, as I said, for somebody that isn't a scientist, that isn't an engineer, that isn't a coastal expert, knowing the staff that we had involved, but also knowing the community reference group and the level of expertise that they brought to the table, and their expertise and their love of Stockton, but also their desire to actually try and get a plan and to work with us, I think is what makes me very comfortable that this is a plan that I can absolutely support and that is going to deliver for Stockton, and that we need to continue, as Councillor Mackenzie's amendment, to work with all levels of government to make sure that this is actually delivered so that the community can see that this is the plan that they supported and that has delivered and protected their beach and protected the amenity. Because, you know, it isn't just a beach, it's not just the amenity that's there, it's actually also the economics that Stockton provide to the city as well. So there's a lot there, and I think, again, I just, the amount of work that has been done to get to where we are, I'm not sure how you actually kind of say thank you and how you actually reward that, because it's pretty crazy. So I just want to say thank you to all the staff and to the reference group, and also to the community in a way that they've all come together to get us to where we are.
Thank you, Councillor. I couldn't agree more. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Church.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to my Ward 1 colleagues, Councillor Mackenzie and White. You've both spoken very well to this matter. I'm also pleased to support this CMP, and it's great that we can now send it to the state government. I'll be voting for this tonight simply because I want to see this matter continue to progress. I have been critical in the past about our delays in preparing the CMP, and I think the state government issuing a deadline was a good outcome for us. I know it did generate a lot of work, but it certainly moved this forward at a rapid pace that mightn't have happened without the deadline. I'd like to join in thanking the staff and the consultants for their hard work, but also recognise the volunteer hours and feedback provided by the Stockton Community Liaison Group. But in voting for this tonight, I want to make it clear that that doesn't mean I endorse every aspect of this plan. And just like Councillor Mackenzie, I've been surprised in recent days by the lobbying from certain Stockton residents who have contacted me to share their concerns and frustrations. It's nice that a large number of people are supporting this, but to say every resident in Stockton approves of this plan is not true. It is still a complex issue with many moving parts and no easy answers for some residents. I thought I would share for other councillors some of the things that residents have been saying in recent days. There seems to be continuing opposition to trucking onshore terrestrial sand and dumping it on the beach. The trial conducted earlier this year was not universally welcomed, and we need to ensure that it's very much a short-term remedy. There are real concerns that while offshore sand nourishment is supported and a good idea, a major storm event could see the sand scoured away from the beach. In other words, we could spend millions of dollars and still be back at square one. And some residents are telling me that options to prevent the northward drift of sand from Stockton need to be more fully considered. And that includes, as Councillor Mackenzie mentioned, the artificial reefs, the groins, any physical intervention that might try and capture and hold the sand back in front of the area between the Harbour Breakwall and Mitchell Street. There is an interesting response in our Coastal Management Plan report on page 130, where it's summarising community feedback. And I thought I would just quote from it because it goes to some of the messages that I've been receiving. While the report is thorough and detailed in many ways, it lacks a wider review of other possible solutions like the implementation of groins, small 5-metre breakwalls a few hundred metres apart, or placing a bommy or artificial reef 200 metres from the shore to take some energy out of the large waves. End of quote. And there have also been calls for a feasibility study to be conducted perhaps into a sand pump, which could move sand from the coastal areas north of Stockton Beach, which seem to be growing at the same rate as the Stockton Beach sand is diminishing. It's been suggested to me that that might be worth considering in a future study, and that it could be actually a cost of simply dumping truckloads of sand onto the beach. There was frustration with council's moving of the holiday park cabins onto Crown land, and some residents believe it was done without consultation and without authority. And there is some frustration at council's consultation processes. I recognise that it was difficult under COVID, and we certainly had a diminished time frame to do that. But, you know, we simply have to return people's phone calls and emails if we're to properly consult. Now, I'm convinced many of these issues can be resolved, and we still need to see if these recommendations can survive the scrutiny of the state government and their coastal experts. But I'm pleased that we have public assurances from the Deputy Premier, the Planning Minister, and the Minister for Local Government that funding will be available contingent on us having done our bit and submitting that plan, and that's why I wanted to go forward. We need to keep this process moving. We can polish the rough edges off over time, and I think we need to remain flexible and responsive. But I'm pleased to support it because I believe the majority of residents do support it, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and for the opportunity to speak in favour of this item. I think all of the councillors that have spoken have said much the same thing, and that is that there is a phenomenal body of work that has been undertaken by our staff, along with the community over recent months to enable us to have a many 100-page CMP before us for consideration this evening. And I just want to preface my comments by again acknowledging the efforts of our staff, but also of the community. I had the opportunity to sit in on some of those meetings and am aware of the degree of passion, but also the enormous time commitment and the amount of critical thinking that has also been put in by the broader community. I did want to make a few comments though to respond to Councillor Church, and by no means do I think that that all of his comments are unwarranted, and I certainly I think that he does make points that do represent the views of some in the community. But it is worth making reference of the community engagement approach that has been undertaken for the development of this CMP. The fact, obviously, that we've had the enormous regularity of the meetings of the CLG and their works to both collect and disseminate information as well as advocate on behalf of residents has to be acknowledged. But also the work of our council staff who provided a copy of this CMP document to every single residential household in Stockton, providing every resident the opportunity to read through the CMP in detail as part of the public exhibition, and the fact that we received 155 community submissions, many of whom came from Stockton, some 75% of which of Stockton residents were supportive of the actions that were contained. I think it's fair to say that just 6 months ago, it wouldn't have been possible to garner that degree of community support. There has clearly been a lot of work done to try and address and consider a whole range of different options, and the work, particularly in addressing the recommendation has been the best one to put forward, is fairly solid and relies on a great deal of evidence, both from the community and scientific evidence. So I'm very appreciative of the volume of work, but also the robustness of the recommendation, and pleased that there's been so much support from the state government. It's also worth mentioning that this CMP originally wasn't due, my understanding, until December 2021. That we had committed to completing it by December 2020, so 6 months away or thereabouts from now. But in fact, we're going to have it lodged before the end of June. Councillor Church was critical of the timing that it's taken to develop this document, but I'd say we are the first council in New South Wales to be lodging a CMP and are doing it 18 months ahead of when it was originally due. I think that would demonstrate the level of commitment that this council has. The other point in concluding my remarks is that there is money on the table from this council to address the issues at Stockton. We're considering a budget shortly that has identified $4 million in the next financial year to begin implementing the initiatives from this CMP. And so it's suitable that both are coming for us for consideration on the same night.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, I'll close the debate, and I acknowledge the contribution of all of our speakers tonight, and also all of the councillors. We did put this out unanimously not that long ago for community consultation, and I share Councillor Mackenzie's view that it does send a very strong signal to our other levels of government who we need to work in partnership with if this is a unanimous motion. I think everyone has covered off the main points in a very collegiate and collective way. It is really important that we do acknowledge it is factual scientific work and done by experts in their fields. And we've had the very good fortune of having community members with significant expertise in coastal processes give their time freely to council for many, many meetings, and have also provided on many occasions sage advice to me personally, so I can, as Lord Mayor, help direct this process to get an outcome for our community. And I really wanted to thank those members of the Community Liaison Group and extend that thanks to a number of members in the community that aren't formal members, but were so interested and so committed and passionate about finding a solution that they also gave up their time to campaign for Stockton and also join community liaison group meetings freely in their own time to stay abreast of all the technical details that have been completed over the last couple of years, but particularly over the last 6 months. What I wanted to highlight in closing and touch on is that while we come to this point as a council and acknowledge the work has been done, there is still a lot of work to do. And that is very much the remit still of the liaison group, but particularly a number of that group is also represented on the Deputy Premier's task force. And it will be very much that collaboration with the New South Wales government that can deliver that mass nourishment option. But we also know from this report that the sediment transport study of the full Stockton Bight with a full 32 kilometres is partially completed, which has provided some of the detailed analysis we need for this report. But the completion of that occurs next year will actually then feed into the full Newcastle CMP from Glenrock in the south all the way through the estuaries and the low-lying suburbs through to Stockton and this substantive part of the CMP, as well as North Stockton. And I think we can't also forget to acknowledge that this is not a moment in time where the work actually stops. It's almost a moment in time to take a breath, look forward to the certification from the Minister, but also at the same time, there's still much more work to do, particularly around solutions for North Stockton, but also ensuring that our full coastline at the City of Newcastle is informed by the most up-to-date research, and that our full city CMP is ready for adoption, which is a huge body of work in itself, later next year. So in acknowledging that, I do commend this document to all councillors, and at the same time thank our very dedicated staff for their tireless work. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? As there are no votes against, I declare this motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much for your support, councillors. Councillors, we will move on to item 32, the making of a rate and charge for 2020-2021. Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, could I please move procedurally that Council consider item number 32 and item number 36 together as a lot?
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Winnie Bartz. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare that motion carried. So we'll consider item 32, the making of a rate and charge for 2020-21. Apologies, councillors. And item 36, the adoption of the 2020-21 our budget, 2018 to 2022 delivery program, and 2020-21 operational plan, and fees and charges 2020-2021. Whoever wrote the run sheet obviously didn't read it out aloud before they gave it to me. Councillors, To progress this discussion, and I know it's probably unusual to do this twice this evening, so bear with me, I will move that resolution from the chair and seek a seconder. Councillor Clausen, thanks. Why I wanted to do this, because I think it's really important also. It's an important night in June. We have the opportunity after community consultation every year and the draft budget being exhibited to our community to finally adopt that budget and indicate to our community in a very open and transparent way exactly where we're going to spend our resources in the next 12 months with particular projects, but also in the context of our 4-year delivery program and our 10-year long-term financial plan. So I think this year is different to many other years, and I don't think I need to explain to councillors why. And I think it is really important to actually signal to our community with this budget that it is a record $116 million capital works program, that an economic REM plan analysis has shown that it will generate up to 700 local jobs and increase the local economic output by $275 million. And I think that's a really important piece of work that we can do as a council in response to the impacts that we had discussed earlier this meeting to COVID-19. By dipping into our reserves due to our financial sustainability that we have achieved over the last 6 years, we don't have to borrow money. We have reserves set aside and we can bring forward works that really beef up a record works program for our city. Looking at a $23 million program to upgrade local roads and footpaths, $17 million for waste management, including $9 million towards the construction of an organics facility that will compost food and green waste. Something that I'm really proud of that we initiated in my time as Lord Mayor on Council, a $14.2 million suburban and city renewal program. We'd heard from many years about the state, not only of the city centre, but a lot of our local centres and urban centres. And as we can see, we've delivered those centres at Carrington and at Beresfield. And we're using the extra $33 million of our COVID-19 response, not only to create jobs and economic activity through this increase in our works program. A significant component goes to our city centre renewal in the Hunter Street Mall, but also I'm very pleased, and I have to acknowledge the tireless work of Councillor Dunn in Ward 4 and that advocacy for Wallsend and the public domain plan that is going to be implemented at Wallsend, as well as Katara, Merriweather, Shortland and Stockton. The increase in that program will see not only benefits in terms of the sustainment of jobs and the opportunity to create jobs and economic investment in our city, but it also sees wholesale upgrades of a lot of really important local centres that support our local community and also our local businesses. I'm really proud that we have an over $9 million spend on our environmentally sustainable projects. In particular, I'm very pleased about the $1.4 million for the Ironbark Creek rehabilitation that also goes to the headwaters to manage flooding in Wallsend. And that work has been a rolling program over many years. I'm also really pleased about the over $8 million for new and improved parks, playgrounds, sporting facilities and aquatic facilities. I'm particularly pleased about the increase of the delivery in new and inclusive playgrounds throughout the city. We've seen a real success and ramp up of that program over the last few years. There's over $7 million on stormwater upgrades to address localised flooding. And I know my fellow councillors, particularly Councillor Mackenzie, is very pleased to see almost $5 million spending on cycleways. And I think it's really important that those missing links in that cycleway network are delivered throughout the city and that we do address safety as an impediment for people taking up cycling as an option for commuting to work and school as well as recreation. We're also seeing $4.6 million towards bridge reconstruction work. That includes a lot of the planning work around Cowper Street and Nelson Street in Wallsend, which is part of an ongoing $20 million program into flood mitigation at the Wallsend Town Centre. Also, another project I've always been very passionate about, and we've seen an increase in this program, and that's $1.5 million to plant new street and park trees throughout the city. And also, I'm very pleased that the extra $33 million in this revised budget that's being presented to us tonight includes $5 million to implement the Climate Action Plan. I know our community is really keen to see that plan adopted by council and then actually have funding to be able to be implemented by council. We've seen the success of projects and the targets we set back in 2012 for the 2020 Climate and Water Pollution Reduction Program. We've seen that through the construction of the solar farm at Summer Hill, as well as the implementation of photovoltaics on many of our city buildings that have reduced our carbon footprint at the City of Newcastle. But there's always more to do with sustainability, and looking at our own operations, as well as partnering with others in the City of Newcastle, is a good way to do that. I think it's a really opportune time as the Lord Mayor of the city to also acknowledge that we are in a very unique financial position. I know neighbouring councils are discussing and adopting their budgets, and due to the impacts of COVID-19, relying on borrowings and the like to be able to either deliver deficit or balanced budgets. But here at the City of Newcastle, because of the work we've done and some of the tough decisions that councillors have had to make over the years, since 2015, we have seen a sustainment of over 3,500 local jobs and an increase in economic output in Newcastle by more than $1.27 billion since 2015. Since this Labor Council took over dealing with the economic management of this city in a very progressive way that was all about protecting our services, but delivering and improving those services and delivering more. That exponential increase in our works program that was down around the $40–50 million, delivering a $116 million program over the next 12 months is the largest and will be the largest works program this city will deliver. And it is around 71% of our total rate revenue. And I think that openness and that transparency with our community, seeing the work we have done to go from a council that had serious financial issues, that wanted to cut and axe services throughout the city, to actually, under our leadership, see services being maintained and protected at the same time as successive operational surpluses have left us in an exceptionally strong position to be able to go into reserves to ensure that we can deliver a budget that helps sustain and hopefully create new jobs in the City of Newcastle. And I think that that is a wonderful achievement. And I really wanted to thank the councillors over the last 6 years that have been on that journey, and my colleagues that aren't on council anymore that have made those tough decisions that have allowed us to be a council in this very good financial position that we can actually deliver more for our community in times of crisis, in times of a global pandemic that no one predicted or saw coming, that we have the financial ability to actually dip into our program and deliver for our community. And I want to thank the staff again. And I know I say this every meeting, but there is a team of over 1,200 people that work tirelessly to implement this vision that this council has. And the decisions we make are important. And every year, without fail, I think it's really important that we have a very robust and genuine discussion about our budget and those services. And I want to thank the councillors, particularly over the past years on this term of council, that have year on, year out supported the budget and allowed us to deliver for the City of Newcastle. I commend the budget to you, and I'll open it up for discussion. I'll ask the seconder if they would like to speak.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm happy to reserve my right to speak until later in the debate.
Certainly. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Byrne?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Listen, I want to reiterate a lot of what you've said with respect to the work, especially from my counterpart, Councillor Dunn, who, you know, has basically overseen and and if you're listening, Councillor Dunn, to recognise the fact that that bridge at Tyrrell Street was a huge achievement. And I think about going back to a previous council that I wasn't part of. Part of the solution to the flood mitigation in Wallsend was simply to remove the bridge, which would have been a pretty hideous outcome for the community of Wallsend. So not only the fact that we've got a replacement bridge, but we've also got now the funding put aside, or you know, for the construction to commence for the Cowper Street and Nelson Street bridges as well. And it is a headline figure at this stage, but certainly $20.8 million investment in the Wallsend area for the flood mitigation, I think is a significant achievement, and I'm very grateful and honoured to be part of a council that has overseen that. When I looked through the budget papers, there were some really fantastic highlights for Ward 4. And look, I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the ones that I think, you know, and I invite all the councillors to come out and see it once they're finished. The Wallsend Active Hub. This is going to be out at Federal Park near the Wallsend Pool. And that'll be along the same lines as the Stockton Active Hub concept, which is really well supported. And I think that'll be a great addition to the community. You've already touched on the local centre design at Wallsend, but also there's the commencement of the construction of the Shortland local centre as well. And I think that's will be a big improvement to the Shortland community. John Hunter Hospital to Wallsend, there's off-road path designs that are going up, which will be impressive. In addition to the Wallsend Town Centre works, there's construction of the traffic signals at Cowper Street and Kachera Street, and they're absolutely needed. Footpathing at Hawthorn Street and Beresfield, the Shortland to Taro Cycleway, again, much needed in that area, and that'll be really welcome. Lord Mayor, you've already mentioned the Ironbark Creek revegetation works in Ellamore Vale and Wallsend. And again, it's a $1.5 million commitment from this council, and that's really going to help that community and then protect ultimately the township of Wallsend. I think about where I am, the pedestrian upgrades along Maryland Drive in Maryland, and there's some significant funding that's gone towards that. Road resurfacing, footpath construction in Ellamore Vale. These aren't necessarily sexy areas of council, but it's absolutely critical and very much welcome, as well as the design and construction of shared footpaths in Fletcher. Again, very welcome. When I looked through the budget papers, there was about 7 pages dedicated to Ward 4 projects, smaller projects. And I can just say that I'm absolutely over the moon with this budget and what it'll do for community out here. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just checking the chat. I've got a request from Councillor White. Councillor White, I checked the chat for speakers, and your name was the only one in there.
Great, thanks, Lord Mayor. You sort of touched on obviously some of the bigger areas, and obviously in Ward 1, it's easy to pick out the big headlines of, you know, the East End and the West End, the renewal of Hunter Street. There's a lot of work around Honeysuckle on roads and the bridge. We've already talked about the money for Stockton. But, you know, there's a lot of other work going on in Work 1. And as Councillor Byrne mentioned, not all of it's sexy around footpaths and roads, but it is important work that our community wants to see completed. And there's a couple, I guess, that I've pulled out as well. And that's some really important repairs for the Civic Theatre, some, you know, the work for the scoping for the art gallery expansion, looking to finalise those works at Clyde Street in Islington. Something that we've been looking at and you know, sort of wanting to do around that cycleways and how do we connect those. There's money there for the scoping works, you know, for the Mayfield area. That's an important link. There's also some work around the design and construction of safer pedestrian access along Maitland Road at Mayfield. There's the Carrobba Oval amenities that I know that not just the kids, but the whole community at Stockton will be pleased to see that one on the list. There's the design and implementation of the Mitchell Street Stockton public domain. Again, it's those little local centres that we've particularly through these last couple of months seen that's where the community has gone to. And I just think it's great that we're able to add some more money to those areas to build them up, to help those businesses. And I think to just help really reinvigorate those areas that have been kind of refound, I think, over the last few months. So I think that's a really important one. And then there's obviously, in terms of Carrington, looking at that public domain that we've had a lot of involvement from the community on. So I think beyond the sort of the big headlines that can sometimes consume Ward 1, there is a lot of other little works that do actually hold a lot of value, and I'm really pleased to support this budget.
Thank you, Councillor. Just checking the chat, request from Councillor Winnie Barks.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd briefly like to touch on the projects that got my attention in Ward 3. Resurfacing of sports facilities at Nesbitt Park, the renewal of Orchardtown Road, the local centres that we spoke about before. Replacement of the water slide at Lambton Pool is something that I think a lot of young people that I spend a lot of time with will be very excited about. Alder Park storage, detailed design for storage at Alder Park. Blackbutt caught my eye particularly. We're looking at spending a considerable amount of money renewing the aviary, and also some detailed design on a reptile house, but also some other projects there that have been on the list for a long time. We've got fencing around and bollards at Thomas Percy Oval and catchment rehabilitation in Waratah West at University Drive. Something else that caught my eye was the $200,000 on upgrading the existing depot solar system over at our depot. And then there is an abundance of roadwork and footpath and exceptional traffic projects that I will not list. But again, I would like to reiterate my support for this budget and the great things that it will do for the people of Ward 3 and the broader LGA, and also support the statements you made before that this budget can only be as the result of some previously difficult and prudent budget decisions and surplus results, and that's why we're able to implement these great things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just wanted to make the point explicit that this is a deficit budget that we are delivering or putting forward tonight, and that's not something which I take lightly. It's something that I think we need to do reluctantly and under great consideration. I think just to labour the point to some extent, maybe a poor choice of words, it's a consequence of 7 consecutive budget surpluses that enables us to do that, which other councils are simply not in the same sort of position to be able to provide that. I'm also heartened by looking at the long-term financial plan, which is also provided in the budget, that shows a fast turnaround from this deficit budget into future budgets. That's mean that we won't be continuing to put ourselves into a position where we're drawing on reserves. It's a clear understanding of my role on council and possibly a life philosophy to leave the place better than where you found it, and that goes for this council as much as anything else. And the idea that we would be leaving the next council or future councils in a financially worse off position than what we were by drawing down on deficits is not something that I take lightly or consider without proper consideration. That said, we're in the context of a global pandemic. It's certainly the biggest economic shock that the city will possibly see for a generation. And I do approve of the approach to the development of the budget and the revision to the budget as a tool to direct the way in which we contribute to the rebuilding of Newcastle's community and economic resilience as a post-COVID. I think that's the reason why we are looking at a $30 million increase on what our public works intended was, our intended budget, or the budget that went out for community exhibition. But the key criteria for that is, in terms of making these additional expenditures on public works, how do those expenditures contribute to the longer term community and economic resilience of the city in a post-COVID environment? I know that there's a tendency in these meetings to sort of, run through the laundry list of all of the things that we like in the budget. And certainly I like the $5 million for the cycleways, and I like the $5 million for the climate action plan. But I don't think that it's quite as appropriate this time, given that we are spending above, we're entering into a deficit. So we need to be really clear about, in our thinking about how these projects that we're working on and contributing to are actually building that long-term resilience of the city. We talked in your Lord Mayor Merrill Minute, Lord Mayor, about some of the areas that have been significantly impacted, particularly you talked about youth unemployment, hospitality industry, the tourism industry, the arts community in particular. And it's a shame to some extent, and I wish there was more that we could provide in terms of addressing those specific areas of hard impact or difficult impact as a consequence. I'm not sure that footpaths really address those concerns, and it's good to be able to spend that money, but those types of construction industries have not been as badly impacted as some of those other ones. And it really highlights, I guess, the difficulties that we have as a council, where we are focusing a lot of our attention onto public works and less onto the provision of community services, that we're not able to provide that kind of targeted response to those industries. That said, I recognise the task force's industry grants that have been put out, and that those are designed to fill that gap, and that is a good thing. I'd like to see us consider more about how we use the information that comes back from that first round of grants to make sure that we are targeting those areas of the city that are most affected by COVID. But I will be supporting the budget. I think it's a good budget. I think it's rightful. I think it's the right time to deliver a deficit budget if we are serious about contributing to the post-COVID recovery. I think, though, that in doing so, we have to be laser focused on the purpose of a deficit budget in this instance, which is to deliver community and economic resilience for our city going forward. Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Councillor. The next request I have is from Councillor Duncan.
Lord Mayor, thank you. How fortunate we are that the city is in a position to offer this budget, and there's a lot of detail and a lot to be very proud of, including funds for the delivery of the city's live music strategy, an industry that has been utterly crippled by the COVID-19 pandemic. But this budget also includes, as mentioned earlier, the city digital corridor that will offer true high-speed connectivity to 2 CBD buildings. And I've seen how important this is for innovation, and encourage very much that investment to continue as part of our smart cities work into the future, and I'm sure it will. But I wanted to highlight just a few of the items that provide some great outcomes for residents and businesses alike in Ward 2, including significant pedestrian upgrades, numerous curb ramps, footpaths, and ensuring that we continue to strive for great mobility options right across this city. And we've seen cities internationally during this crisis suddenly have to reckon with how they actually do move people through their cities. The Cycleways projects that will come through Ward 2 include detailed design for Adamstown to Newcastle West, the junction to Merriweather Beach, Broadmeadow to Newcastle West, Broadmeadow Station to Newcastle West will be a significant inclusion in some of the issues that I was just speaking there previously about mobility in whatever the new normal is. This budget's about people. And I think the renewal of number 1 sports ground at National Park with a new plan of management, that's over $2 million investment in this much loved and highly used facility right in the heart of the CBD. The bathers' work continues, that's wonderful, but this budget also looks at some of the smaller items around that, like ensuring that all of the coastal shower locations and drainage infrastructure is fixed, is repaired. It's fantastic. Our beaches are for everyone, and these improvements will be appreciated across the city by our people. In Hamilton, I know that the community will be very happy to see the funding is in for the detailed design and construction for James Street Plaza, continued road renewal designs for Samden Street along the side of Gregson Park, which will undoubtedly complement the forthcoming work on a revitalised park itself. And I can assure you the community is very, very keen to see these projects progressed. And as I often point out, our beautiful and historic Gregson Park is a critical green heart for the city as the CBD moves west. So the people of Newcastle love this park. I'm hugely proud to be working as part of this team and the community on shaping its future from this point. Jollison Street in Katara, the Katara Neighbourhood Centre, Merriweather Town Centre design and construction, over $2 million devoted to that project. And Woodward Street, Merriweather, a street with some difficult issues, but will start to get the attention that it needs, including a geotechnical assessment and design options. And I know that the local residents will be very, very happy to see that item included. There's funding in this budget as well for restoration of things like small pockets of surviving littoral rainforest, including right in Merriweather. Now, these pockets are considered endangered, so this is really important funding. So I just wanted to thank the staff for the work on this budget, because this budget, I think, is truly about people, and it's about families, and it's about business, and I'm very proud to support it tonight. Thanks, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. The Councillor Dunn is the next speaker.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As a Ward 4 councillor, I obviously echo the comments of Councillor Byrne. I won't go through some of those highlights again. I think Councillor Byrne did a good job of covering off on those, although I must say I am personally looking forward to seeing the continued upgrades in Wallsend. That's something that we've all worked very hard for a number of years. And I'm also very excited about the Shortland upgrades to the local centre there. That little strip hasn't changed from when I was a child, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing some much needed upgrades there. But I would just like to also make a special thank you to our CEO, Jeremy Bath, because really none of this would have been possible without his support. Those of us that were on the previous council would understand the difficulties that can be encountered, but Jeremy has done a fantastic job in really making sure that this council's resolutions are enacted, and we've been able to achieve what we have achieved, and I'm very proud to be part of this council and the last. And but I think the CEO misses out on the acknowledgement a lot of the time, and I'd like to make a special thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn. Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, I will give my right of reply. So, Councillor Clausen? Okay.
Apologies, Lord Mayor. Councillor Church had requested this item be debated, so I was assuming that he would speak, and I was interested in hearing his thoughts.
Of course, sorry, I didn't check the chat. Councillor Church, did you want to speak?
No, thank you, Lord Mayor.
Oh, okay, certainly. Did you still want to speak, Councillor Clausen?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, it is disappointing that we haven't had the opportunity to hear all councillors' views on something as important as the budget. Undoubtedly, they'll be making their views known in the press tomorrow, so it is unfortunate that we haven't been able to hear them in the chamber this evening. I'm very supportive of this budget for all of the reasons that the previous 7 speakers have identified. This is a strong budget. It is a budget, as Councillor Duncan identified, that puts people, family and businesses first, which I think is exceptionally important, particularly at the moment, especially as Councillor Mackenzie identified, the fact that this is a deficit budget being run in immediate response to deliver community economic resilience in relation to COVID. In moving this motion procedurally this evening, I asked that we debate both the rates part and the budget components together. And I know that rates aren't a particularly exciting thing to talk about, but I did just want to make sure that it was mentioned and captured in the discussion tonight that we are both setting a rate and also adopting a budget. And it is critical that councillors consider both of those components when voting on this item. The reason being, last year, you'll remember councillors, we unanimously voted in support of collecting a rate, but then had a number of councillors vote against the expending of that rate in the budget. So I want to make sure that they're tied together and people are aware of both. Councillors, it's important to reference, particularly with mention of rates, that this budget actually sees a decrease in business rates right across the city. The average business rate decreases by $277 as a result of the adoption of this budget, with more pronounced decreases in quite a number of suburbs. Indeed, business rates only increase if their land values have gone up by more than 33% since the valuation was last undertaken, which is quite a considerable increase. And so when councillors are considering their vote this evening, I'd certainly suggest that they do consider the fact that this budget will see a rate decrease for businesses right across the city of Newcastle. The other component that I just wanted to make mention of, and it's captured in REM plan figures that are at the beginning of the council documentation is the enormous economic value of council's capital works program, particularly in terms of the economic multiplication effects that it generates for local jobs and those very deep local supply chains that we have that particularly engage with small business. The data that's presented in the report shows that our budget will create 700 local jobs, which is a very considerable amount. And I particularly want to make mention of the fact that it's tied very closely to the local benefit, especially given the decisions that we've made about our procurement policy and making sure that there is a local procurement benefit. I'm pleased that we've been given the opportunity to consider a budget that is about the economic and community resilience of our region, that it is delivering local jobs, that it is particularly focused on projects that are in favour of locals in Newcastle, our people, our families and our businesses. And I'm proud to second this motion at council this evening.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rufo. Councillor, you're on mute. I'm
sorry, Lord Mayor.
That's okay.
I was just saying, I just want to apologise ahead of time if I start coughing through through this process. Excuse me. I just want to touch on a couple of items, if I may. I appreciate that the works program is a large scope of works and it has got many different moving parts to it. And again, I think, as all councils have, those individuals that are responsible for putting it together and executing it. I just want to touch on the $22.9 million that has been allocated for upgrades to local roads and footpaths. So, councillors, I asked via CSR for an explanation on how we choose to replace existing footpaths as opposed to constructing new footpaths in suburbs and streets, and there are many that have no footpaths at all. I received the response via memo, and among other things, I was told that the City of Newcastle register, and I'll read this from the memo, City of Newcastle register and mapping of existing footpath networks enables the identification of areas where footpaths are lacking or have not been constructed in the past, and that these locations, along with all other areas missing links or streets with no footpaths, will be considered as part of the development of pedestrian network and future programs. That's great. And I thank the staff for the response. But can I just add that I'm in my second term of council, and that 8 years on, there are many areas that I asked about in the first year of me starting on council, that still no work has been done. Now, this is of concern to me, in particular when I see school children, mums, dads, pushing a pram, all those walking their dogs do so on the street because there is no footpaths for them to use. So I simply like to ask and encourage council to concentrate more on the areas where footpaths are lacking or have not been constructed in the past when we're allocating funds to footpaths, please. As was raised just moments ago tonight we're considering not only the draft budget, but also the fees and charges, including a rate increase of 2.6%. Now, in recent council media releases, it was stated that the budget also includes a further 3.3 million community and economic resilience package, providing significant targeted relief for businesses, residents, and the most disadvantaged members of our community. Well, I'm sorry, but how can we be giving with one hand and taking with the other, especially in such a time of financial devastation due to the impact of COVID-19? I do not believe that households, businesses, and all our most disadvantaged members of our community can afford a rate increase. I support the overall intent of this draft budget, but like the 20% of residents that commented on the draft budget and voted no to the 2.6 rate increase, I also don't support the rate increase, especially at a time that many are in a period of financial difficulty. Now, before I'm accused that I don't appreciate the work and effort that our staff put into complete the draft budget, and or that I oppose the works program, let me just say this is simply not true. In fact, I'd like to go on record that I thank all our staff at all levels in council for their work and commitment that they carry out and show day in and day out. But unfortunately, I will not be supporting this item. Thank you.
Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. A question to the CEO, just in following up on Councillor Rufo's comments. At the last council meeting, we adopted a notice of motion about allocating the 2.6% towards additional hardship measures, particularly noting COVID. Councillors might recall that there was no debate or discussion for that particular item. So it's interesting it's come up again this evening, but I would just like to ask the CEO to provide some comment about how we're particularly targeting residents and businesses that are experiencing hardship due to the COVID crisis.
Happy to speak to that. After I speak to that, I might also just take the opportunity to respond to Councillor Rufo's questions and well, not questions rather, but comments in regard to a number of issues. I was anticipating a question in regard to the economic stimulus package and the $3.3 million that's allocated in this budget towards it. I won't go through line by line each of the projects unless councillors furiously nod, but to give a breakdown, there's another $250,000 that's allocated to continuing the City Task Force work that has been underway to date. That effectively was a resolution of the council back in March of this year. There's $250,000 to continue local online training programs. There is $175,000 in community grants. There's funding for the continuation of expanding of the digital library in terms of additional facilities for those people who I guess are suffering in self-isolation and for fear of leaving their house during the pandemic crisis. We have the Lean In Yui app, which has $116,000 allocated to it. The community wellbeing program of $800,000. There's $250,000 for the Newcastle After Dark program. There's $150,000 for arts and cultural grants programs, $70,000 for economic development grants, $280,000 for event sponsorship when events can be held again. So there's a significant amount of areas of this year's budget that are targeted to those that are doing it tough, whether unemployed or suffering in social isolation. If I could just make comment in regard to Councillor Rufo's concerns in regard to the 2.6% rate cap, recognising that there was a resolution of the council in May. But I would remind of history's record when it comes to blunt instruments and their overwhelming failure. I don't for one second wish to dismiss the hardship that many people in our city are going through financially as a result of the global pandemic that is COVID-19. However, we cannot pretend that 100% of our ratepayers are suffering financial hardship. If we look at the financial hardship measures that have been put in place and supported unanimously by this council in March of this year, you would remember that we've taken a very reasonable approach in terms of those people who are suffering financial distress and who are unable to pay their rates on time, that they can go onto a hardship program where for amounts as little as $20 a month with no interest, no fees, and that will continue for at least another 12 months. And it's then my intention to bring that back to the council for consideration of a further extension. It's worth noting that of that offer, only 1% of our residential ratepayers have actually requested to take up that offer, citing financial hardship. Now, that 1% is not just the number of people who have taken up. It's also the percentage of residential ratepayers who have actually been approved to go onto a hardship program or financial support, recognising that the overwhelming majority of our ratepayers, of our residential ratepayers, have chosen not to take that up. It certainly isn't because of ignorance of the financial hardship. Councillors are hopefully aware that we wrote to every single residential and business ratepayer earlier this year, making them aware of the financial hardship support that we were offering to them. So again, without wishing to suggest that COVID-19 hasn't had a devastating financial impact for some people in our community, blunt measures such as waiving a rate cap of 2.6% for every single ratepayer, simply I don't believe is the best way of seeing ratepayers' funds at work. And the other comment I just wanted to make, Councillor Rufo mentioned footpaths. Look, Councillor Rufo, I'm happy to have a conversation with you offline if you believe that there are certain roads that should be prioritised over others in regard to footpaths being made. I'd love to have a magic wand where we could afford to lay a footpath in every single street in the LGA. That financially just isn't possible, both from a workforce perspective as well as a financial perspective in the short term. I do note, however, that this budget does allocate $760,000 just to the construction of footpaths over the next 12 months. But again, Councillor Rufo, I'm happy to have a conversation with you offline if you believe that there are certain roads and streets that should be prioritised.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Luke.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just following on actually from the General Manager, CEO's comment there, the comment about a rating, not having a rate increase is a blunt instrument. Well, having a rate increase is just as blunt an instrument, but to have a measurement of whether you can actually tell if 100% of people are in fact worse off. If you applied that to some of the other things that have been done through this period that have actually been praised, things like the JobKeeper payment, the federal government didn't go out and say, well, if each employee is not worse off, then we're not going to do the JobKeeper payment. They actually looked at a way of doing something that would be measurable and easy and quick. The final result was some people were in fact better off because of that JobKeeper payment. But in that doesn't make it any worse effective in the way it was or the way it operated. It was a quick, easy thing to do that would actually get a result. My concern with the rates tonight is that we are increasing rates by 2.6%. After 5 years of fairly substantial rises, at a time when we've gone into this downturn, we are clearly moving into a recession, or probably in a recession now, but we'll get a measurement of it soon. That sort of time, you do not tax your way to prosperity. Tax increases, that's what rates really are. A tax increase by a government body is not something you do at a time of a recession. It's one of the worst possible things you could do. The 2.6% increase is not that substantial, but it would have actually, I believe, been a much better gesture to the public to have not done that rise. We've actually had 5 years of fairly reasonable rises. And I know often the rises we have in the last 5 years often get compared to some other councils in recent areas. But it has to be remembered, many of those councils are actually increasing their overall rate intake, not individual rates. However, they've been getting higher amounts of rateable property and higher amounts of higher rateable property because of the development that's occurring in those areas, such as Maitland. So in actual fact, where they've had fairly large increase in the overall collection, it's actually not as big an increase on individual ratepayers. So the individual homeowner is actually not paying all of that increase because it's spread over a very, very large number of new homes being developed and new land developments going on in the area. So there's a very big substantial difference in how they apply. We don't have the same amount of that as other areas do. I actually don't think that having and I will support Councillor Riff on what he said, having a 2.6% rate rise now at a time like this is not something that we should be doing.
Thank you, Councillor Luke. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I appreciate I have already debated, but just for the point of clarification to Councillor Luke, and happy to have a further conversation with him. In the notice of motion that we considered at last month's meeting, and that's recorded in the minutes at the start of this month's meeting so that it's for easy reference, there was a table that summarised the average rates across the Lower Hunter for residential properties and showed that Newcastle's average residential rate was consistent with those of other Lower Hunter councils. In fact, some of the councils you just referenced have a higher average residential rate than us. So I think we just need to be clear around what we're debating. The individual rate paid by an individual residential property is consistent with what is paid by those others. Indeed, Maitland's rate was slightly higher. Lake Macquarie's is all of $14 different to ours. So they're very consistent.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just checking if there's any other speakers.
Lord Mayor, I think just noticed that Councillor Rufo has just asked for a leave of absence for the meeting. He's obviously been unwell, as we all know, during the meeting. I'm happy to move that he be given the leave of absence for the rest of the meeting.
Seconded by John McKenzie, or Councillor McKenzie, pardon me. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare that motion carried. Councillor, is there any further discussion on the substantive motion before us? If there's no further discussion, I will use my right of reply. And I appreciate the wide-ranging contribution because it is a very important document and does outline our spending as a council for this community over the next 12 months. But I have heard the opposing comments and the councillors who have shown intent not to support this budget going forward. And what I would say to those councillors, you can have results or you can have excuses, but you can't have both. And I've said this time and time again. It takes courage and it takes commitment and dedication to be able to stand up and make decisions. And tonight is one of those nights. So as an offhand comment to say, oh, I want some more footpaths and I also want to support everything in the budget, but I will not vote for a motion of supply. It is ironic and it is not really acceptable because at the end of the day, you cannot stand next to the projects in your ward, whether it be a cycleway or a new park being delivered, and with all conscience say that you were genuinely part of the delivery of that project. It's the councillors, and I said this at the top of the meeting, that have sat here, you know, with great consideration. And these aren't easy decisions for our community. And a lot of the time they take a lot of deliberation and a lot of discussion and a lot of trial and error to get them right. But we are in a very good financial position because a number of council laws, some of them still on this council, on previous council, made some very tough decisions with great opposition and continual opposition with some misinformation thrown in there that has allowed us to be in a financial position where we can draw down on reserves. And those reserves are collected for the purpose of exactly that, and that is renewing assets. And I would argue that although our long-term financial plan sees us coming into modest operational surpluses, like that we have been running over the last 6 years of this Labor Council, that at times like this, we do not know exactly how long we will be in a global pandemic, but it is likely to be longer than we imagine, given the state of the world at the moment. And if that occurs and we need to draw down further on reserves and go into deficit to make sure our community is sustained, I think that is exceptionally appropriate. We have run modest operational surpluses in the good times, and we are in a position to support our community in the tough times. We had a very detailed motion brought to us by Councillor Clausen, and he's mentioned, and it's been mentioned a number of times tonight, around the discussion around the New South Wales government of that made for all councils, that over 95% of councils are passing on the 2.6% rate cap increase. There's been tables formatted, there's been an increase in population, there's been an overall decline in the business rate. We've also seen the impost on local government broadly across New South Wales that rate capping has given us. And I've had many robust discussions in furious agreement with former councillors like Councillor Osborne about the negative impact on local communities on rate capping. So really, if we're going to have a genuine discussion on rate capping, it should be about the negative effects on councils and local communities. Councils like ours and the size of ours should have the autonomy to set that pricing structure as we see fit to support our local community. Thankfully, at our last council meeting, the full 2.6% that we will collect will go directly into all of our hardship programs to support the most vulnerable in our community and support the work that the task force and a number of the working parties are doing with those vulnerable industries. I noted Councillor Duncan listing a number of those economic development support programs already in this budget. So when I hear councillors say, oh yeah, I want the full spending in the works program, I want the works program of $116 million, but I just can't support it tonight. Well, I say thank you, a genuine thank you to the councils that will stand up and vote for this tonight, because without that resolution, none of this can be delivered in the City of Newcastle. Not one project, unless a majority of councillors want to do that. And it makes it very easy to stand in opposition and say that you're not supporting the budget for one thing or the other thing, but then come along and stand next to us when we're opening new parks, we're delivering new roads, we're delivering new cycleways, we're delivering on our carbon and water pollution reduction program, when we're delivering year after year for the City of Newcastle. You have to take those decisions very seriously, and those decisions are made, as Councillor Mackenzie has already suggested, with a lot of thought, because it is a different year. We are using an extra $33 million to stimulate our local economy. And I'm really proud of that program that has been put together that really spans that work and invigorates the local centres throughout our city. It looks at the nuts and bolts of local government in terms of waste management, in terms of sustainability, in terms of roads and footpaths, because that is our core business. And our budget at the end of the day not only supports our core business, but it also supports a $275 million economic injection into our local economy that sustains over 700 jobs. So this is very much a budget in response to COVID-19, but it is also a budget that I think we should be really proud of. And I acknowledge the commentary from a range of councillors across the city in different wards that have pulled out really important projects that we as councillors have been in strategic planning sessions, in workshops. We get together once a year to look at our priorities as a council. And I recognise the long-standing work of councillors like Councillor Jason Dunn and his acknowledgement of the work of the CEO and his team in actually responding to councillor requests and councillor needs as representatives of our community. And we have seen a marked shift in how we are responding to the community with our budgets. This is probably the most comprehensive budget that I've seen as Lord Mayor of the City of Newcastle. And it's been put together over many years of work. And that includes feedback and all our comments and all our commentary that we've been passed on, taken very fairly and put into the budget. So all of the councillors that get to get their moment in the sun of saying they don't support the budget each year, guess what? It's magnanimous in terms of our leadership here of the councillors that do support it, because we're more than happy to include those projects and make those decisions and stand up and take leadership for our community. And that's essentially what we are doing tonight. And I stand with you and I thank those councillors that spoke in support of this budget, spoke in support of the work that our staff have done. And I thank you in advance of making those tough decisions for our community. But in my mind, it's very clear. You have to stand up whenever you can in an elected role for our community. But this is a very, very important document. and it is a job creating document. And if there's one thing every city in every region and every LGA around this country and around the world needs, it needs to know that government is in the business of creating and sustaining jobs. And I think that is the highlight of this budget. Of course, the extensive works program that matches the priorities of this council and these councillors, and all the work that we've done in those strategic planning sessions over the years and workshops with councillors actually coming to fruition and being delivered, I think is an important note. But I think it's all about jobs, creating and sustaining jobs. And that's what voting for this budget does. So not only do I thank those councillors standing up tonight, I also acknowledge the tireless work of the staff, particularly in certain teams, putting this document together, collating the response from residents, noting that there are a number of submissions actually asked us to go into reserves to support the community. And in many ways, this is a response to those submissions. But I also note that our resolution from last month that has taken over the second half of this discussion after we talked about all of the amazing projects we're delivering in the city is about the New South Wales government's rate cap that they've imposed on all local government areas of 2.6%. And we acknowledge that that is an impost to some members of our community. And that is why the full amount of that 2.6% is going straight into our hardship programs. And I think that is a really important distinction that we should make in this budget. And again, I will also just say that by taking these really strong decisions, by not making excuses, by aiming and delivering and asking for results for our community, I can say proudly, since 2015, 3,500 local jobs have been sustained or created by our works program and the successive increases in our works program. And that has increased the economic output since 2015 across Newcastle of more than $1.75 billion. And I think that is something all councillors should be very proud of. I know that I'm very proud of those tough decisions I've made in collaboration with you all, but I think that is something that people in Newcastle can actually see their city changing. Their streets, their suburbs, their parks, their playground, they can see that in an accelerated program over the next 12 months. And I think that is something that I'm exceptionally proud of. So thank you to the councillors in advance of your support. Thank you for your positive working attitude and your collaboration, particularly over the last few years, to get us to the point where this is a budget that I think we should all be really proud of. Like I said, you can have results, but you can't have excuses. You can't have both. This budget is about delivering for our community and supporting the most vulnerable in our community. And I commend it to you, but I also commend it to all of Newcastle. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against?
By divisions, please, Lord Mayor.
All those in favour, please raise your hand. Councillor Nelms, Councillor Winnie Barts, Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor White, Councillor Dunn, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Clausen, Councillor Byrne. All those against, please raise your hand. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Luke, Councillor Church, Councillor Robinson. I declare the motion carried. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, the next item on our agenda is the exhibition of the draft local housing strategy. Councillor Winnie Barts. Are you moving the recommendation?
Yes, Lord Mayor.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. I'm delighted to bring the draft local housing strategy to the elected council to be put out tonight for comment and feedback. This document provides us with a strategic framework for the next 20 years across the LGA to meet our future housing needs. It builds on our community strategic plan and also gives life to the state government documents, Hunter Regional Plan and the Greater Newcastle Metro Plan. I was delighted to sit on the working party developing the local housing strategy, and this evidence-based inquiry has led to the delivery of a robust and comprehensive paper. A mix of affordable and sustainable future provision with to meet diverse needs of our changing community is imperative. 6 housing priorities have been developed, including maintaining and encouraging the housing supply in the right location, diversity and type of tenure, availability of accessible and adaptable housing, assuring that new houses and changes to existing houses reflect our local character, increasing the supply of affordable and rental housing, and designing of homes that are sustainable. Newcastle's residential areas have experienced growth and change, meaning we need to identify emerging housing issues. While relevant issues such as supply and demand or opportunity and constraint may often be at the forefront of our minds, it is imperative that we provide a path for more affordable and diverse housing types while complementing the character and heritage of our great city. It is imperative to ensure that Newcastle's heritage and character is protected as new housing ideas are developed. Local character statements will recognise the unique heritage of an area and be developed with local insight. New housing must enhance and contribute to future character, and changes must complement existing character, all while developing positive housing strategies for our constituents. The growth corridors and catalyst areas detailed in the Greater Newcastle Metro Plan and the Newcastle LEP will assist us to achieve a wider mix of housing types while delivering for the whole community, being mindful of age groups, abilities and income. It is also vital that our land planning and instruments support housing growth. Integral to the outcomes presented here tonight are input from DPI, community housing providers such as Compass and Evolve, the University of Newcastle, our local developers, community focus groups, and all under the umbrella of our Housing Strategy Working Party. Patricia McCarthy and Stella Fielding and their team have driven this strategy with enthusiasm and an exemplary commitment to the very best outcome for Novocastrians. I'll list them off. The Hunter Region Plan, the Greater Newcastle Metro Plan, the Greater Newcastle Future Transport Plan, Newcastle's 2030 Community Strategic Plan, the Newcastle Affordable Living Plan, Heritage Strategy and the LEP have 3 overarching and consistent themes. The first one is that housing should be diverse. The second, that housing density should be constructed and developed around public transport and activated hubs. New housing should complement character. This data-driven strategy includes some interesting insights, which actually attach to some of the conversation we've had earlier tonight. Newcastle's population is set to grow by 41,150 by 2041. Newcastle has a very large proportion of young adults compared to the rest of New South Wales due to tertiary studies and new employment opportunities. Our population is ageing slightly, as is the norm around the country, with a predicted rise that will see our over 65 age group making up 17% of the population by 2041. Lone households are our most common household type in Newcastle, followed by couples with children and couples without children. Not surprisingly, these households are closer to our CBD, the lone households, while couples with children reside further out in the suburbs. The number of new households is predicted to increase by 18,250 by 2041. Average household income is around $72,000. This is higher than other regional areas, but lower than the New South Wales average. Most notably, 1 in 3 households have an annual income of less than $48,000, limiting their ability to pay in any way for housing. Purchasing a home in Newcastle is generally unaffordable for anyone in the moderate to very low income bracket. This in turn leads to more households forced into the rental market. As at 2018, the median house price for a detached dwelling in Newcastle's LGA is 11 times the median household income. In more affordable suburbs, it climbs to 15 times the median household income. Housing stress, which is defined as any household paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs, can often be a broader indicator of community wellbeing. Interestingly, in our 2016 study, moderate income households, 33% of which suffered household stress. Low income bracket suddenly jumps to 73% of households in housing stress, While our very, very low income earners in that bracket, 93% of which sit in the household stress bracket. This demonstrates to us that there is a significant demand for affordable housing options required in Newcastle. It is reasonably safe to assume that the onset of COVID-19 has made these situations, in fact, more dire. So the success of our draft housing strategy not only lies in the data-driven outcomes and objectives, but also in the implementation plan. A clear set of short, medium and long-term objectives based around the 6 key housing priorities, including the development of an affordable housing policy. So this implementation plan is a living document that will be able to be adapted as time goes on. In conclusion, again, I'd just like to thank our staff led by Patricia McCarthy and Stella Fielding for delivering this document, and I look forward to seeing the feedback from our community. Thanks, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Winnie Bartz, and I just wanted to acknowledge your work on that working party and that committee, and thank you for that. You can see it shining through in that address to Council. It's very much appreciated. Councillor Mackenzie?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm not sure if there's any stone that was left uncovered by or untouched by Councillor Winnie Bartz, but I also want to echo my thanks for her role in an ongoing way in the Affordable Living Working Group, which has contributed to the development of this plan. And just to echo the points that she made in relation to the work that's been done by that unit of council, which is, I can't remember off the top of my head a council meeting in recent times where we haven't had to consider local strategic planning statement, heritage strategy, metro plan, so on and so forth, all of which are being generated by that unit. And I think that that's a true testament to the work that they've done. It also means, and this is a really positive thing that I can say about this draft strategy, is that there's significant alignment between the findings from the studies that are informing this local housing strategy and our existing planning instruments. In many ways, what this work has done is it's confirmed many of the suppositions and the objectives that are outlined in our LEP in particular, but as Councillor Winnie Bartz said, in the Metro Plan and the Hunter Regional Plan as well. So it's good to see, and I think it's a really positive thing to see the way that all of our planning instruments are aligning around a similar vision for how we want the city's growth to be managed and its density to be managed. It highlights the value of the growth corridor approach, the urban village type approach. Councillor Clausen might say the Newcastle urbanism approach, continuing on, stretching back from 1995 when we first articulated the uniquely Newcastle vision for urban planning. It's reiterated time and time again, and this housing strategy only adds to the value that's been determined in relation to that. I wanted to highlight the 3 key areas of housing need that comes out of this plan. The social and affordable housing, the lack of social and affordable housing, student accommodation, the lack of student accommodation in the area, and housing for people with disability or high care and needs. And in all 3 instances, as the implementation plan starts to point us in the direction where those priorities can be addressed. But most importantly for me on a personal level is this is the forerunner to the implementation of a SEP 70 affordable housing levy, which we have been, I know that I and others have been just committed to delivering during this term of council. We're very close to actually seeing a fully implemented SEP 70 type housing levy to actually address some of those social and affordable housing needs based on priorities that have been identified on an evidence-based in an evidence-based way. And I think making the steps towards that is only going to improve our ability to provide the diverse housing opportunities that Councillor Winnie Bartz has referred to. So I'm very happy to see this out on public exhibition and fully applaud the work of the entire the entire group that has been involved in these successive developments of planning instruments for our city. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mackenzie. Are there any other speakers? I'll just check the chat. Councillor Duncan.
Lord Mayor, thank you. I just wanted to, I guess, raise a really important point for people to think about. That was one of the great learnings from my trip with the City's Leadership Institute last year. And it was one that was completely sobering to me when you think about the disasters that this city has gone through, and at some point in the future will again. And in the city of San Francisco, some 90% of that city's first responders, so we're talking police, we're talking fire, we're talking equivalents of our SES and so on. Around 90% of them live at least an hour or 90 minutes away from the heart of the city. Now, if you think about that in the context of next time a major disaster happens in that city or in our city, and sadly, we know that these things will happen, it is a critical reason why the work and the support of this affordable housing work here in the city, as Councillor Winnie Bartz has outlined so very clearly, is absolutely critical to make sure that we keep many workers of that sort in the city where they can help people when they need it most. There are a million reasons for doing it, but that's just one that I thought was a really critical point for people to just think about. Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, I speak in favour of the motion and obviously acknowledge the work of Councillor Winnie Bartz and also the Livable Cities Committee and those members in delivering this in collaboration with obviously that very hard-working team at Council. I just wanted to say that I acknowledge the housing priorities, the 6 of them, and speak in favour of those. And I know that particularly working with a number of councillors, I think Councillor Dunn and Councillor Clausen in the past on affordable housing strategies and ensuring that they actually do end up enshrined in our LEP or in a SEP 70 arrangement has been a priority for a number of years. And it is an iterative process with policy development, but I'm really pleased to see this progress and this progress in line with Newcastle urbanism and in line with our current planning strategies. It's interesting to note that we have different challenges to other gateway cities in that we have a significant amount of heritage, which actually I think is a wonderful competitive advantage for our city and an absolute treasure. And we also have significant undermining throughout the city, and all of these factors contribute to either areas where infill housing is either difficult or to deliver or not prohibited. But when our LEP has been reviewed, we actually have over 90% of our housing growth is infill development. And councillors are very experienced now on council, and everyone is aware of the local issues that any infill development brings to us through our DAC committee, or whether it's through representations of larger scale developments going to the Joint Regional Planning Panel. And so it's very, very important. It's dry policy, but it is exceptionally important as we are custodians for a period of time of those documents that we get those overarching policy levers right. And it's unfortunate that the NRAS scheme has been pulled or not funded federally under successive Conservative governments. Otherwise, we would have seen at least some amount of social and affordable housing being delivered within the significant increase of development within our city centre. I think it's a huge lost opportunity not having that direct funding and that salt and pepper approach through those developments. And I've said that publicly on a number of occasions. It really does need a whole of government approach. And in local government, again, we are pulling our weight in this sector, but it will need, and I note in the absence of a national settlement plan and a national housing strategy, that we are always going to be tweaking around the edges until we can actually bring a national alignment around settlement and that overarching planning. And that is why I acknowledge our neighbouring councils, particularly in the Lower Hunter with the support of the JO, but the Greater Newcastle Plan and the work that we do with Port Stephens, Lake Macquarie, Cessnock and Maitland is so very important in terms of planning and that overarching planning and looking at those complementary uses between LGAs, because we don't sit here as an island, we sit here as a greater metropolitan area. And I think that it is very unique that we have that collaboration here in the Lower Hunter, and it's reflected throughout this document. So I speak in favour of this document, and I'm really glad to see it come to fruition in this manner. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Winnie Barks, would you like your right of reply?
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Just, I guess, to reiterate what you've all agreed on by the sounds of it, that developing and implementing a really robust housing strategy is vital to providing for our community, and it's directly tied to good community outcomes. This is completely data-driven, this paper, and it will ensure that we've got a needs-based and future-focused deliverable plan for the LGA. And it's not lost on me that there are a lot of protections in this paper and respect for our local character and heritage, and I am particularly supportive around the local areas of significance. So I commend this to us and can't wait for the feedback from our community.
Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? Are there no votes against? I declare that motion carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We are up to item 38, the classification of council land 280 Hunter Street, Newcastle. Do I have a mover of the resolution? Councillor Clausen. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne. Would you like to speak to the motion, councillor?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor. Just very briefly, I'll move the officer's recommendation, which is that we classify 280 Hunter Street as operational land. Councillors will recall that we recently acquired this land, and the reason for its acquisition was for a cycleway. At the time that we acquired the land, we put it out on public exhibition to confirm the classification as operational land, and then this matter is coming back to us this evening. The officer's report identifies that of the options, whether it could be community land or operational land, the choice of community land isn't appropriate because its intended purpose is in part to be a cycleway, which isn't allowable readily on community land. So I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation as is printed.
Thank you, councillor. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm going to vote against this because I don't agree that cycleways require operational land. I think this should be retained as community-based land. I want to reference in particular the guideline classification Crown land managed by council Crown land managers, which is a document put out by the New South Wales Department of Industry, which states pretty clearly actually that the uses which are incompatible with community land, cemeteries, coastal infrastructure, emergency services, quarries, gravel pits, reservoirs, sewage works, water infrastructure and the like, none of which are in any way similar to cycleways. And in fact, that same document points out that the onus is always on council managers to identify and satisfy the minister that land under that management couldn't be categorised under any of the other categories that apply to community land in the Local Government Act. And if you look at section 36I of the Local Government Act, one of the uses is called general community use. The core objective for that is to promote, encourage and provide for the use of the land or provide facilities on that land in relation to public recreation, physical, cultural, social and intellectual welfare. In other words, there's no reason why we should be classifying this as operational land. There's no reason why we need to do that in order for there to be cycleways. Cycleways are the preferred use, and it's much more important that we retain the community land classification for all land, which is under our management of Crown land context. Primarily, I think ultimately we're not land speculators. We're not property developers here. We're custodians of community assets, and it's up to us to ensure the proper and appropriate use of those community assets. And that means, in this instance, retaining the community land classification and tenure over this particular block. So I'll be voting against this this evening. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I have a request from the CEO.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just in regard to Councillor Mackenzie's comments, the land isn't Crown land, I guess is my first point. I think Councillor Clausen acknowledged that one of the intended purposes of the land is for a cycleway, and they are typically operational. This is also similar to a number of council sites, whether it be libraries or City Hall, Wheeler Place. But most importantly, the land is not zoned RE1 public rec. And it's for that reason, most importantly, that our recommendation is that it be categorised as operational.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Church.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. A question to the CEO. Thank you for clarification, Mr. Butt. Can it be rezoned so that it is secured for cycleways use and community use?
That is a very long and complicated process, Councillor Church, with no guarantee of success.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? If not, I think what Council has done and the steps we've taken to acquire this land, we have been very upfront about the purpose for which we've acquired it, and that is to ensure that there is an east-west cycleway link that is available to separated cyclists in the city. We know that our long-held plans for Hunter Street were changed when the New South Wales government truncated the heavy rail line and installed light rail partially on Hunter Street, and that the planned cycleways are able to be delivered in Newcastle West, but not in the same fashion in a separated manner in Newcastle East. And that link has been a long-standing sore point with our Cycleways Working Party and many members of the community. I think it's commendable that Council has actually gone out and deliberately acquired this land, put in for the tender through the process with the New South Wales government to actually have this land back for our community. What I think is appropriate that we take the advice of our officers who, under our previous resolutions of this council, given the papers that we've had on this, are able to actually successfully implement and install the cycleway link on this land and associated community infrastructure. And if this is the recommended outcome and path forward to make sure this cycleway is delivered, then I'm very supportive of it, and I'm happy to take the advice of our staff on ensuring this missing link and this cycleway is going to be delivered. Are there any other speakers? If there are no other speakers, would you like a right of reply, Councillor?
No, thank you, Lord Mayor.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against, please raise your hand. I declare that motion carried. Thank you, councillors. Councillors, we are up to the notice of motion section on the agenda. Item 12, pardon me, apologies. I just need to do one thing. I have a request from Council Services that we have a report back on item 39, which is the next item which we voted on when we were discussing the agenda without debate, and ask for the CEO to report back to Open Council on the outcome of that resolution of item 39. I'm waiting for the CEO to report back on item 39. I'm sorry, I got a message from Council Services that we needed a report back because the resolution was passed, but the resolution would be held in the separated confidential section of the papers and needed to be reported back to council in open session. And chronologically, we're up to item 39. We can do it later if that suits. I've just had a request from the CEO that he would like to do that later. So I will move on the agenda. Apologies, councillors. We're up to item 12, notice of motion, shining example of energy transition. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Clausen, do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne, thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to consider this notice of motion. Bringing this back on the agenda, the Summerhill Solar Farm, of course, has been an item that has been discussed a fair bit at council, but I thought it was worth, in addition to just its casual mentioning through the debate from time to time, probably also bringing back some recent success in terms of the amount of energy that it's generating and the savings that is bringing to ratepayers of the City of Newcastle. The solar farm is almost 6 months old since it was commissioned in November of last year. And since that time, it's actually exceeded our expectations in terms of the amount of revenue that it is generating. In the first number of months of its operation through to the end of April, it generated more than $420,000 in revenue, which was almost double the original forecast that was used in its business case of $250,000 a year. It's probably worth mentioning, of course, that business case demonstrated that the solar farm had a highly favourable rate of return and was a positive investment for the City of Newcastle, even with the expectation that it would only generate $250,000 a year in revenue. And so the fact that we have surpassed that quite considerably within its first number of months in operation is definitely something worth considering, worth celebrating and considering. And I'm really glad that it's back on the agenda for us tonight. The second component, of course, councillors, is the fact that from the 1st of January this year, the City of Newcastle was the first council in New South Wales to be powered by 100% renewable energy as a result of a renewable power purchase agreement with the Sapphire Wind Farm and through contractor Flow Power. And as a result of that decision, councillors, we've also saved an additional $30,000 compared with business as usual energy costs. So something that is worth considering, particularly on a night when we're discussing budgets and the city's finances, the fact that these were exceptionally prudent decisions that have generated significant immediate financial returns for ratepayers of the City of Newcastle, as well as been obviously the right thing to do from a sense of acting quite genuinely on climate change and transitioning the city. So I'm very pleased to be able to report back the success that we've had with those terrific renewable energy projects.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clausen. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Church.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Clausen. In many ways, this notice of motion is misleading. Councillor Clausen has conveniently ignored the cost side of establishing and maintaining the solar farm at Summerhill. Now, I support renewable energy and I commend Council's addition of solar panels on many of our council-owned buildings, as well as the valuable water-saving initiatives which have been introduced. Terrific stuff. But this project here has cost council a lot of money. $8 million to return $250,000 is not a typical rate of return that you would expect in the commercial world. Council has entered into a $6 million loan to pay for the solar farm. It had to find $600,000 every year to pay back the principal and interest over 10 years. And that's money which could have been used for other capital works. The viability of the farm depends on what is known as large generation certificates or federal government subsidies. They're more than $500,000 a year. In other words, it doesn't stack up commercially in its own right. And third, there was no mention by Councillor Clausen of the ongoing maintenance costs that will increase as the panels become less efficient over time. So if you want to discuss these important issues like the viability of the farm, you should tell the whole story.
Are there any other speakers, councillors? I think it's an opportune time that I should point out to councillors that, and I have earlier in the discussion, that the building of this solar farm has helped us exceed our renewable energy targets under our Newcastle 2020 carbon and water pollution reduction program. which targeted 30% of our own electricity needs from low carbon sources. So this was actually an initiative under one of our own strategies. That's the first point I'd like to make. The second point I would like to make, and I think it's very important, given the last speaker, we have had this debate on several occasions, and we've all been, given a copy of the business case quite some time ago, and it showed that the solar farm would save ratepayers around $9 million after costs over its 25-year lifespan. And now the early results show that we're on track to do even better. So really the business case showed a base case or a worst case scenario, and that was a saving over 25 years of $9 million to ratepayers, at the same time as we're significantly reducing our carbon footprint. The 5 megawatt solar farm, and coupled with the 660 kilowatt of rooftop solar that we have, provides the energy needs of over 1,700 houses in Newcastle. For me, it's definitely a win-win, and I think it's a really important differentiation again, not only the financial sustainability of council and the adoption of budgets, but also our commitment to renewables and sustainability with the Labor and Greens majority of these successive councils, I think is an exceptionally important point of difference given the way this debate has gone. This notice of motion is timely, because it shows that this 5 megawatt solar farm has generated more than $420,000 in revenue since it went live in November to the end of April. And this is way above the original forecast of just $250,000 a year. And this is exactly what this notice of motion brings back to council to celebrate, that not only is it meeting our expectations in terms of reducing our carbon footprint, it's actually exceeding our financial obligations. So my expectations, if we continue to track down this path, is that ratepayers should save more than $9 million over its 25-year lifespan. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I agree, it's a timely motion, and it's good to reflect on the outcomes of these investments and to celebrate, I think that was the word you used, Councillor Clausen, these kinds of achievements. But it also might be a little bit early for these celebrations. Given that there's a number of areas of climate action that still remain under resolved in this council, and that's the entire purpose for which we're directing $5 million in this budget to address. In particular, the 77% reduction in carbon emissions is very highly considerable, an impressive figure by any measure. I mentioned it last week in relation to our unanimous decision to join the Climate Emergency Australia. But the areas that remain outstanding for us, in particular the Summerhill Waste Management Facility, which still generates about 75% of the city's carbon emissions, and areas where we do have an opportunity to reduce those carbon emissions even further, such as through our transport energy use. So whilst we've done we've made incredible achievements on our stationary energy use, and they're not to be underestimated. The opportunities are there for us to make real inroads to our transport energy use, and we've talked about that in relation to things like electrifying our fleet, the waste management facility, the waste management fleet in particular, and also through Summerhill and projects that have also been committed to in this budget, like the organics recycling facility, actually make a real significant difference to our carbon emissions and make it possible for a city like Newcastle to approach carbon neutrality and even potentially make a carbon positive impact on the climate. And as the point has been made, in every instance, these projects have not only been beneficial from a climate, from an environmental, from a pollution standpoint, they've also been financially viable and in fact improved the financial position of council. I look forward to many future shining examples of our transition and seeing some of the projects that we have already scheduled and are already budgeted for this meeting coming to fruition and making that transition even more real for the people of Newcastle. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, your right of reply, Councillor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Only to conclude by, again, acknowledging, as I did at the beginning, that this is something worth acknowledging and celebrating. Councillor Mackenzie's and yourself, Lord Mayor, are perfectly correct in identifying that this is just one initiative of a whole number that will be developed and implemented as a result of our new climate action plan that will be developed across the remainder of the financial year, of which there has already been a series of community consultative events undertaken, indeed held via Zoom, which I think is worth acknowledging and just celebrating just how novel that is as a form of community consultation drop-in sessions. I was disappointed with Councillor Church's comments. I don't think they accurately represent the case or indeed the point that I'm making. And I would draw anybody that is interested in the business case in particular to an article that was written by Ian Kirkwood in the Newcastle Herald in 2018 in response to having having sat down and read through the business case with some of our staff. Somebody that I'm sure that he would describe himself as a professional skeptic who in conclusion found that there was a very favourable case and justification for City of Newcastle to invest, that we had undertaken all appropriate due diligence and it was a sound financial decision. And then we've seen that reiterated tonight with the numbers in terms of the amount of revenue that's been generated by the solar farm year to date. So I'm very pleased to bring this motion to Council and hope to have your support.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare the motion carried. I'm surprised, Councillor Clausen, you didn't make me do it by division.
Perhaps Councillor Church would like his name recorded against.
If that is his wishes, I'm happy to facilitate. Councillors, that brings us up to item 13, clarification on local land services catchment, hunter catchment contribution levy and benefits. Do I have a mover of the motion? Councillor Clausen. Just one moment. I just wanted to make sure that previous motion was carried. Did I say that? Great, thanks. Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie, for nodding because everyone just stares blankly into Zoom. Sorry, go ahead. You were moving that as well, Councillor Clausen?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne, thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll speak briefly to the motion. I've tried to explain it as simply as I can in the text of the motion and hope it's something that councillors have had the opportunity to review. Obviously, already this evening, we've adopted the hunter catchment contribution charge that we collect on behalf of local land services. And so I just want to preface my following comments by taking it as a given that I am in support of the idea of a catchment charge. I think that it is something that is quite sensible for the City of Newcastle and something that I have personally seen the benefits of, the work previously with the Hunter Central Rivers CMA and now with local land services, and the opportunity they provide for us to jointly invest. Some projects in particular are things like the quite phenomenal upgrades to the Lambton-Carrai Creek that runs through Lambton Park. That was a joint project between the City of Newcastle and the Hunter CMA then, and facilitated in part by this levy. So I just want to preface my comments by making that statement. But in doing so, councillors, I just want to draw your attention to the relative murkiness that exists around the Hunter Catchment Contribution Charge. In fact, in the Local Land Services Act and the Local Land Services Regulation, we are the only catchment in the state that has this particular charge applied, and it's levied in quite an unusual fashion. For the average Newcastle property, there's an expense of $34.50 a year on residential properties and $71 on business properties that collect just under $2.6 million in revenue each year from this catchment contribution. In total, the catchment contribution across the Lower Hunter only collects $5 million. And so City of Newcastle funds more than half of the total cost of the catchment contribution. Interestingly enough, the local government regulation actually outlines the circumstances when local land services is allowed to charge a catchment contribution, and it is only where there is a shortfall in available funding for catchment activities to local land services. So there has been historically a budget shortfall for local land services that is made up for by an extra tax that is levied on City of Newcastle residents, more than any other local government area in our region. About a quarter of the funds, or actually by legislation, a quarter of the costs of managing the Hunter Valley Flood Mitigation Scheme come from this levy. And despite other councils being the principal beneficiary of those, there's a discrepancy in the amount of the levy that is paid by City of Newcastle residents versus those paid in other local government areas. So, for example, as I mentioned before, Newcastle residents will pay $34.50 each for the catchment contribution, but those property owners in Maitland only pay $19.07. There's also an issue of democratic participation that exists here. The local land services, for people that aren't familiar with them, are set up in a way that mimics the structure of local government. There are elected board members. In order to be elected or stand for election, you have to be a ratepayer to local land services, which understandably is largely large rural properties. But despite the fact that there is this fee or levy collected from City of Newcastle residents, there isn't an opportunity to have representation through that board. And so there's no direct ability of us to influence the spending decisions of that catchment contributions that is collected from City of Newcastle residents. So with that in mind, that background, point 8 of the motion is the key action component, which is just that we invite the Chair and CEO of Hunter Local Land Services to come and present to us at a briefing and outline some background on the purpose of this charge, what it's collected for, how that collection benefits ratepayers of the City of Newcastle, and whether there's an opportunity for some of those funds to be spent towards some long-standing catchment issues that exist in the Newcastle local government area.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any further discussion? Sorry, I'm just checking the chat. Councillor Mackenzie, thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Clausen, for bringing this to the councillors. I have to admit that when I read this, I felt like that this was a justification for us making an argument for reducing the amount that we contribute to the LLS, and I don't support that. I think my understanding of catchment management, I think the understood sort of principles around the management of catchments is that everyone in a catchment benefits from environmental improvements, and particularly the lower end of the catchment. I think the contribution that we make to the continuation of funds made available to provide environmental services to all residents across the region is important. I think locating us within a regional focus is critical. I think the work that's done by the CMAs and now the LLS is vital environmental management work. I wouldn't like to see us argue that we should be paying less, or to see a bidding war between councils in our region, to try and sort of secure different amounts of payments. I think the levies are fair for the services in terms of environmental management that we get. That being said, I'm very supportive of point 8. I think that the opportunity for greater input, the opportunity for greater transparency, the opportunity to have some contribution to the priorities and directions of LLS programs and projects would be welcome. But as long as this process isn't being set up in a way to try and reduce the contribution that the City of Newcastle makes to catchment management as a whole, which I think is a positive contribution for the city, for residents in the city, but also for the region as a whole. I think that's the key basis. If we're focusing on point 8, the key reason why I can support it is that it's about improving transparency and consultation in the way that our catchment management is delivered. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers? I can't see any other speakers. Would you like a right of reply, Councillor Clausen?
No, thank you, Lord Mayor.
I'll put the motion as moved and seconded. All those in favour, please raise their hand. All those against, I declare that motion carried unanimously.
Lord Mayor, I note that Councillor Luke is no longer on the meeting. Should we grant him leave of absence?
If you would like to do that.
I think I would, Lord Mayor.
Okay. Are you moving that motion, Councillor Church?
I am.
And do I have a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against, I declare that motion carried.
Thank you.
Councillors, that ends the notice of motion section. I will just check in before we go into the confidential session if we could have a report back from the CEO on the outcome, the resolution for item 39, the Open Council.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Seems everyone can hear me. The item 39, recommendation 1, Council accept the following tenders for contract number 2020-322T, Natural Areas Rehabilitation Services. 1, Terra Defensa. 2, Victoria Ecological Restoration Services. 3, Traditional Aussie Gardens. 4, Hunter Land Management Proprietary Limited. Resolution 2, recommendation 2, this confidential report relating to matters specified in section 10A 2D of the Local Government Act 1993 be treated as confidential and remain confidential until the Chief Executive Officer determines otherwise.
Thank you, CEO. The next item on the agenda is confidential reports. There's only one item because we've dealt with the other item in open session. It's item 8, but to get there, I need a resolution of councillors to move into confidential session as per the reasons stated in the business paper. Do I have a mover of that? Councillor Winnie Bartz, do I have a seconder? Councillor Byrne, all those in favour, please raise their hands. All those against, I declare that motion carried. Can I just request, as we move into confidential session, that all staff except the CEO, Director of Governance, Manager of Legal Governance and Council Executive Support Coordinator and Council Services IT team meeting support be moved into the waiting room. Thank you.
And
Lord Mayor, I believe Councillor Duncan also has a conflict with this one that was declared last time.
Yes. In my run sheet that Council Services has given me, there is a process that we follow, and that is in step 2 in the next section. So I just need to wait until that.
Administration of the Code of Conduct. 3, receives the report of the independent conduct reviewer included at attachment B and notes that the report has been reviewed by the Office of Local Government. 4, in accordance with the findings and recommendation of the independent conduct reviewer and to help ensure public accountability, A, name the censured councillor in its resolution, and B, provide details in its resolution of the conduct that has been found to be in breach of the Code of Conduct. 5, accepts the finding of the independent conduct reviewer that on the 4th of December 2018, Councillor Kath Elliott breached clause 3.1E of the Code of Conduct by becoming verbally abusive and aggressive towards a member of senior staff. 6, notes that Councillor Elliott was consulted throughout the investigation and was provided with a formal opportunity to make a written or oral submission to Council. 7, in accordance with section 440G of the Local Government Act 1993 and based upon the findings and recommendation of the independent conduct reviewer, formally censures Councillor Kath Elliott for breaching clause 3.1E of the Code of Conduct. And recommendation 8, treats this confidential report relating to the matters specified in section 10A21 of the Local Government Act 1993 as confidential.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you very much, councillors, for your attendance this evening, particularly those who stuck it out to the end. I note that we have adopted the budget for the next financial year, which is, and also unanimously, the Stockton CMP to go off to the Minister for Gazettal this evening, and I appreciate that unanimous support for that motion. I'll close the meeting at 9:31 p.m. and look forward to hopefully catching up with you all in person over the coming months. Good night.
Thanks, Noah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.